And greetings, everybody. I'm Salvador Cordova. Welcome to the Evidence and Reasons for the Christian Faith video channel. It is an honor being with you all today. So let me try to adjust the screen a little bit. The other icon here is just a bot. It's a backup bot in case the primary computer fails. The stream can continue, and then I just transferred to the other computer. So welcome everybody to this channel. We explore evidence and reasons for the Christian faith. This channel is organized especially for Christian believers that would like to learn about the evidences and reasons for believing, and it's my hope that it can strengthen the faith of my fellow brothers and sisters in Jesus Christ. So the opening song there, I've just kind of adopted it just for now because there's no copyright on it. It's Rachmaninoff's Rhapsody on a Theme of Paganini. It is. I used to play piano before I started studying all the sciences and engineering, and because that's where there were jobs in that field. Not so much for classical piano, but I've always had a love for classical piano. I'm not sure if Dr. Sandy Pidgeon will be able to join us. He's a very busy gentleman, and he has responsibilities. But I did invite him, and I told him he can drop by anytime that the show's still on. So with that, we'll just proceed with parts of the show. The goal of this show also is to declare the works of God and to memorialize them and to talk about them. And as we ponder them, it lifts my soul up too, and um, it hopefully lifts up the souls and spirits of those viewing. God is hidden to many of our eyes in a variety of ways. First of all, in First Peter chapter 1, verse 8, it says, though uh, you love him even though you don't see him. So in that sense, God is hidden from our eyes. He could appear in the skies, and he could appear to us in visions as he did to many of the people in the Bible, but for the most part he chooses not to. I've tried to go into some of the reasons that the Bible explains why he chooses to do business this way, and I think atheists have had um, a very good. They raised a very good objection. It doesn't mean I agree with it, but I consider it very strong. It's like, well, why doesn't God just be apparent to our senses as, like, say, the seeing the sun or the air we breathe, et cetera, et cetera. And I I totally get that. One of the reasons, and I don't think it's the only one, and there are a variety of reasons specified in the Bible, is that I think God uses this to separate those who really want to pursue him versus those who don't. And he doesn't make it easy to pursue him. Oh wow, Dr. Pidgeon's here. Sandy.
What's up, brother? Can you hear
Oh
me?
brother. Hey, it's great to see you. I'd like to let me just introduce you first to the audience, and then we can get going with the show. Uh, this is my friend Sandy Pidgeon. He and I actually went to the same church, McLean Bible, even though both of us have now effectively left. That's another story. Um, and we actually got to talk for the first time on the internet. And actually, the first day we met was at my mother's funeral in person. And that was a sad day. And yet, it says in Thessalonians, we do not grieve as those who have no hope. And in a sense, it's sad for us who are here on earth, but it was a happy day for mom. Happy day for mom, and for God's saints who have gone home to be with the Lord.
Amen.
So, with that, um, I wanted to play a ditty for you visiting, Sandy. Like
Uh-oh, did you
bullets,
find that?
punch, Marine Corps. So
Awesome. Play it, brother.
uh, I'm trying to work out issues with copyrights, and I do want to respect intellectual property, but Google and YouTube are sensitive to that because they don't want to get sued either. And sometimes it's not clear whether there's a copyright on something or not. And so I set up a channel that I use just to test out the copyrights, and they shut it down. And then I wrote them. I said, that's not my intent, and I'm not a spammer. It talked about spam and commercially deceptive practices and being deceptive. I said, my channel's none of these things. And so I said I've deleted all the videos where I felt that YouTube was raising an issue, and they reinstated my channel. Said, "Oh, we're very, very sorry, sir." And so, that being said, I'm going to use that channel to kind of test out whether I can play something. When I can find something, I'll because there is a lot of good educational material out there that I'd like to share, and then also entertainment value. And if I can share it on this channel, I will. I just wasn't able to get around to playing that ditty, but we can we can always sing it. So, uh, Sandy, is that your nickname or was that your handle in the Navy?
No, my babysitter gave me that nickname when I was a little kid because my hair was white. Of course, I don't have any hair now, but that's life.
Okay, so Sandy, perhaps you could introduce yourself and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, Sal and I'm a retired SEAL officer and just finished my doctorate in Christian apologetics at Southern Baptist, and happy to be here. Happy to help out with the, especially the archaeological and experiential apologetics that I think are missing in a lot of apologetic approaches, because those two things alone are almost you can't defeat stones, and you certainly can't defeat the experiences that billions of people have had and changed lives. And I think that that's something that we really need to press on.
Amen. Perhaps there's some probably viewers here did see our show on Hezekiah, and if you could share a little bit about what that did for you when you heard the sermon one morning and how it changed your life.
Yeah, I was in a dark place back in 2012, and my son dragged me to church. Yeah, kids, oftentimes know when their parents are in a dark place. So the first sermon I heard was on the Battle of Jerusalem, which was in 701 BC, and the archaeological evidence is what cued me in. The entire Sennacherib cylinder, the Siloam water tunnel, the strengthened broad walls outside of Jerusalem that are all documented in Isaiah 36:37, but also in Kings and Chronicles, put a hook in me. And from there, it took about a year until I finally gave it all up to the Lord. But that led to, as you and I have talked about, Sal, I had a phone in my hand, and I had a week off from work, and I was going to apply for flight lessons at Manassas Airport to learn how to fly bush planes. Since I jumped out of planes, I finally figured out that I would like to learn how to fly them. But the Lord came with one of those waves of the Holy Spirit through and said, "Nope, you're going to go to seminary." To which I replied, "I know nothing." And I get the answer back, "I'll be there, period." And he was there every step of the way. I can tell you that. He is the one who got me through all of those things, because I knew very little about the Bible. I had read, things in Sunday school, but I had not been a churchgoer. I was at best a warm Christmas Christian, Christmas and Easter. But that really set the hook in me, and God's providence was amazing, because as we talked about, the new hold on a second, my wife said shut the door. Sorry about that. She's watching a movie. As a matter of fact, she's rewatching The Chosen. That's an excellent series. But anyway, God sat me down in my new job next to a guy who's probably forgotten more of the Bible than I'll ever learn. And the guy who was sitting across from me had just finished the course of study at Liberty that I was undertaking. He was a medically retired Apache helicopter pilot. So talk about God's providence in action. Holy mackerel. Two of the guys right there that would go on to teach me things. We started a Bible study together, and I learned a lot of things from those guys. Still do. Still keep in touch with them. And but things such as systematic theology, which we've talked about as the advanced calculus or advanced physics of theology, is very difficult, and he got me through every step of the way on that. So I was only thinking of getting a Master of Divinity, but the Lord said, "Nope, you're going to go get a doctorate in apologetics." So I would consider myself somewhat of a generalist, we kind of in the teams always joke that we're masters of jacks of all trades and masters of none, except for probably combat swimming. But so most of my apologetics training is in pulling out the philosophy of what I see in scientific apologetics. I've concentrated also on some of the legal aspects, and we see that going on in the Loudoun County schools right now of freedom of speech, and how secular humanism, which has been designated by the Supreme Court as a religion, a recognized religion, which is in much consternation with the American Humanist Association and several other entities that try to squash Judeo-Christian ethics in schools as being such, even though that those ethics that are proposed come straight out of Judeo-Christian ethics in schools. So I've dabbled in those, and all of the different classical apologetics, evidential apologetics, etc., the moral ethics that are involved, etc. So I'm looking forward to learning more, especially the eye-watering things that I've been learning on this channel. That's for sure. Down at talking about HEP synthase, and I was rereading a thing in the Scientific American, believe it or not, just came out with an article on May 28th talking about the amount of information that DNA holds, and they compared it to the Library of Congress being squeezed into the size of a poppy seed. And that's the density of DNA information that is in just even one cell. And I can post that in the chat if you want to. And it's not, it's not like Scientific American is any kind of an ID, an intelligent design rag whatsoever. So I was completely taken aback when they printed that. Very interesting article.
Well, thank you, and again, I'd like to, since you're in the Navy SEALs, I want to thank you for your service to our country, and
I had fun. Yeah, you were talking last night, Sal, because you were talking about doing instrument flight rules, and in submersibles, it's all instruments. We're inside of a swimmer delivery, SEAL delivery vehicles most of them are all wet. We have a dry one. I got to fly the dry one for years until it was destroyed in a battery fire, but they've come out with another one, which is a little bit smaller, but it's all instruments. You've got your eyes fixated on the compass dial and on the instruments and on the depth gauges. So it was kind of funny hearing you talking about instrument flight rules, because I remember my mom once, and this is years and years ago, she was saying, well, how do you see out the window of these things? And I said, Mom, it's pitch black outside. You can even if you're pulling back the canopy, you can't see anything. So it's interesting that it's all instruments, and everything we do is in darkened conditions, as well as in the wet submersibles. You have a rig on your back, so you have to monitor your dive profiles. You have to monitor what the rig is doing. So it's a very time consuming, and a 6-hour dive can go like that. You're so busy all the time. There is no time to really sit back and think about what you're doing at all. So,
well, I tell you, you've had some really interesting experiences, and one of them, you shared it with some of our colleagues earlier, and they thought that was fascinating. You were doing an exercise, and you saw sharks, and some guy was punching the sharks.
That was up at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. It was a for those who don't know, the foundation of the SEALs was started back in the World War II, where the Marines especially had a disaster on Tarawa, where the landing craft crashed into reefs outside of Tarawa, and 5,000 Marines got off. Well, the reef was there. They couldn't make it across, and thousands of guys drowned before they even hit the beach. So units were formed, underwater demolition teams on the West Coast, and then what called Navy combat demolition units on the East Coast. And their job was to do what we call hydrographic surveys, which back then was just a lead line and a slate, and you got on line and just swam perpendicular to the beach and took soundings and then marked obstacles, and then you would come back the next morning, tie demolitions to those obstacles and blow them up so that the landing craft can have a obstacle-free landing. If you saw the opening scenes of Saving Private Ryan, you saw Tom Hanks was hiding up against one of those obstacles, and a guy comes up and says, "I got to blow these obstacles." Well, that was a Navy combat demolition unit that was there to clear out all those obstacles so the landings could occur, which they had done previously, but then they come in and they move everything out of the way so that they form lanes. So that was the inception of the underwater demolition teams, which then in 1962, President Kennedy formed them into the SEAL teams. And because they had done, UDTs in Korea had done the same things, but they had extended their missions inland to blow up railway tunnels or take on shipping via underwater vehicles. So everything, I hate to use the word evolved, but kind of moved on from there to what we have today, which is a whole potpourri of mission sets that you have to work up on before you deploy. I did a lot of submersible work at SEAL delivery vehicle teams 2 and 1, including the experimental. And you can look this up on the internet, the Advanced SEAL Delivery System. That was the first time we had built a dry submersible. So I had and it was very interesting to operate that vehicle because there was a submariner who was deck qualified to operate submarines as an officer of the deck in one seat, and I was in the other seat working all the sonars and then locking guys out of the vehicle through a hatch in the bottom, which Northrop Grumman made famous. But unfortunately, we were at the top of the technology spectrum in batteries, using silver zinc batteries, which are very difficult to manage and prone to fires and things like that. But so they went to lithium ion. It was the biggest lithium ion battery in the world that had been built to that date. It was in 2002, 2003. Unfortunately, they had some problems with the separators, and the battery was, goodness gracious, a couple of rooms in a house big, that was attached to the bottom of the vehicle. Since then, they've perfected that lithium ion technology. And that's back when, back in 2001, 2002, when lithium batteries were catching fire in laptops. So we were all a little suspect of how we were going to take that technology and expand it, exponentially to the size that we needed for power density. And but they've proven to be now very effective. And there is also a lithium iron battery, which is even safer. Doesn't have quite the power density of that, but it is a much more maintenance-free battery. So
is that the right picture there, Sandy?
Yeah, that's an old. That's a Mark 8 SDV. You can put 4 guys in the back there. That back panel slides open, and then the pilot and the co-pilot sit in the front, and that's a wet submersible. So guys sitting in the back are in total darkness for 4 to 5 hours. And one of the problems that they face if they're going in to do some kind of a kinetic operation is, and you can equate it to, I had to explain this to a Assistant Secretary of Defense once, that, why did we need a dry submersible? I said, well, sir, here's the issue. Say we're taking out a radar installation with a sniper team. You're going to have these guys sitting in the back of an SDV, which is akin to sitting in the trunk of a car with cold water being poured over you for 4 to 5 hours, and then getting out and then trying to take a precision shot with a weapon. It's just, it is so physically taxing. And so, not that it can't be done, it can be, but why not try to get something that is a bit more operationally amenable? So
How we got on that topic, I was asking you about the guy who punched the shark.
Oh, I'm sorry. So yeah, we're off of North Carolina, and we're doing one of those, just a hydrographic recon. It's like 2:30 in the morning, and then the Marines are going to come in to land the next morning. We send them back the information on the beach. Is it safe to land, et cetera. And people have done hundreds of beach hydrographic reconnaissance on those beaches, so it's not like anything we hadn't done before. And but they said, hey, we got to go in and do it as a training scenario. Well, we're swimming in on the line again. It's about 2:30 in the morning, and it was fairly warm out. It wasn't bad. It was springtime. We're swimming in, and my chief petty officer and I were at the head of the line, so we're swimming perpendicularly into the beach, and then we would get up on the beach and move the guys down, and they take soundings. Well, as we're swimming in, I got smacked in the hip, and I was like, what was that, a sea turtle or what's the deal? And then my chief got the same thing. He got smacked in the hip, and we both looked at each other, and we said, hey, dude, I think that's a shark, because it's a tiger shark breeding ground off of North Carolina. And so we just started swimming like madmen, pulling the line, because all the guys were attached to a line and were swimming in. Well, I didn't learn this until about a year later from one of my guys who went on to what's now called SEAL Team 6. But he said that my AOIC, Lieutenant Scott Greshner, was in the back at the end of the line, because we had command and control at the end of the line. Actually, a shark came up, and he and it was a small shark, but they come up and they harass you. Well, he started just beating on the shark's nose, and and the shark took off. But everybody was quite quite taken aback about the whole thing. And he didn't have to pull out his K-bar or kill it or anything, because a shark's nose has a large volume of I think it's an oil, but they use that to sense things in the water, as do dolphins. So it was quite a night when we got done with that. But he beat the crap out of that shark.
Before I forget, I had to ask you about Charlie Sheen and the movie Navy SEALs. Was there something about that involved you in the movie, like your shoes or something?
Yeah. If you go after the chief gets killed in Beirut, they went in to do a snatch and grab of a CIA asset and take him out. But anyway, in the movie, they're in. It's actually the Ready Room is the bar. It's right outside of the Naval of Oceana Air Base, and it's kind of a pilot hangout. Well, they decided to film in there, and some guy comes in, and they're having a wake for the chief, and Michael Bean, who's playing the officer in charge, is upset. He's still in his SDBs, and everybody's upset because the chief got killed because Charlie Sheen screwed up. And so some guy comes in. Nice guy. I got to talk to the guy who actually was the actor afterwards, Titus Wheeler, I think his name was, memory serves. But he comes in and says, "Hey, Squidly, is this your bar?" And they're watching a videotape of these guys drunkenly playing golf. So anyway, Charlie Sheen comes over, chokes the guy out, and a lot of us were extras in the room. Just we could make $100 just standing there, the whole day. And drops him to the floor. Well, if you look to the extreme left on the panning of the cameras, the guy's lying on the floor. There's my dirty tennis shoes. So that's my 15 seconds of pain. What's funny is we had guys from SEAL Team 4 and SDV Team 2 that were in the background just playing extras, and it was fascinating to see how hard these actors do work. I will give it to them that one 5-minute scene took us 13 hours to film.
Wow.
That was pretty amazing. Yeah. So, and Michael Biehn never broke character. He was crying the whole time, and was upset, and it was a fascinating look at Hollywood in that entire scene. So it was also kind of funny. We filmed a scene that was not even in the movie. Later on, down on the shore, it was a party, and then the beeper goes off, and everybody's leaving. And I'm sitting there, I was just talking. My wife was outside, watching the whole thing. She's kind of funny. And one of the paid models came in, who was one of the extras, and she says, "Well, you guys really don't do this stuff." And I looked at her. What do you think we do? I mean, why do you think they're making a movie? What's the matter with you? Anyway, it was a very interesting look at Hollywood, and that was also a difficult scene to. Even though it never made it into the movie, but Charlie Sheen had just broken up with Kelly Preston, as Kelly Preston was then starting to date John Travolta, and they later got married. She's since gone on to be with the Lord. She was a Christian, but Charlie Sheen was crying hysterically the whole time. He's having to go in and out of character the whole time we're there, which was really bizarre. But anyway.
Wow, the acting profession, incredible. Well, yeah. I'm just gonna explain to the viewers. I wasn't 100% sure that Sandy was going to be here tonight. I told him 9 p.m., but I told everyone you're real busy, and I always feel privileged, because it wasn't. This is more of spur of the moment, because usually and I said this is kind of a spur of the moment show. So we had a few things on a lot of things in our list today, and since Sandy's here, I definitely want to take priority and give him a chance to speak what's on his heart, what the Lord has laid. So I invited him to talk about his program and the things he studied, and so we could go into detail about some of the specific topics in apologetics. And I was also interested in Nietzsche and nihilism.
Oh, yeah. Oh, sure.
So, but I would like to read the scriptures here before we move on. People may ask, well, why do you believe in the Lord? Why Christianity? And first I will... Oh, let me try to put this in the chat here, see if it'll...
Yeah, I just sent you that article on the Scientific American about the ultimate data storage solution. A fascinating article for both those who subscribe to the intelligent design. But I think our atheist friends will find it very fascinating, the density of information that is, and they put it into layman's terms in the beginning of the article. So it's fascinating, the amount of information that's been delineated in this article. I found it just amazing, because Scientific American is not exactly friendly to the intelligent design movement. So I found that rather refreshing that they put that in there.
So I'm just going to read from a little bit from Acts 5. And then this is an answer to, because I've covered atheist intelligent design, pagan intelligent design. I guess we could lump in Muslim intelligent design and then Christian intelligent design. And why is it that Christians believe that the intelligent designer is the Christian God? And I say that that's where creationism and archaeology come in, because the testimony God has given us through history and archaeology point to real events where he had intervened and identified himself as the God. And So I'll cover just a little bit. And this was a passage that helped me a lot. And then I was thinking maybe you could also say, Sandy, you can cover Gary Habermas. I was also thinking that we could talk a little bit about Gary Habermas in the book of Corinthians. But this passage is one that was important to me. So I'll just read it and then I'll point out which part of this passage was important. But a man, Ananias, with his wife Sapphira, sold a piece of property and with his wife's knowledge kept back for himself some of the proceeds and brought only a part of it and laid it at the apostles' feet. But Peter said, Ananias, why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit and to keep back for yourself part of the proceeds of the land while it remained unsold? Did it not remain your own? And after it was sold, was it not at your disposal? Why is it that you have contrived this deed in your heart? You have not lied to man, but to God. When Ananias heard these words, he fell down and breathed his last. And great fear came upon all who heard of it. The young men rose and wrapped him up and carried him out and buried him. After an interval of about 3 hours, his wife came in, not knowing what had happened. And Peter said to her, Tell me whether you sold the land for so much. And she said, Yes, for so much. But Peter said to her, How is it that you have agreed together to test the Spirit of the Lord? Behold, the feet of those who have buried your husband are at the door, and they will carry you out. Immediately she fell down at his feet and breathed her last. When the young men came in, they found her dead, and they carried her out and buried her beside her husband. And great fear came upon the whole church and upon all who heard of these things. Now, many signs and wonders were regularly done among the people by the hands of the apostles, and they were all together in Solomon's portico. None of the rest dared join them, but the people held them in high esteem. And more than ever, believers were added to the Lord, multitudes of both men and women, so that even they carried out the sick into the streets and laid them on cots and mats, that as Peter came by, at least his shadow might fall on some of them. The people also gathered from the towns of Jerusalem, the towns around Jerusalem, bringing the sick and those afflicted with unclean spirits, and they were all healed. The high priest rose up, and all who were with him, that is, the party of the Sadducees, and filled with jealousy, they arrested the apostles and put them in the public prison. But during the night, an angel of the Lord opened the prison doors and brought them out, and said, Go stand in the temple and speak to the people all the words of this life. And when they heard this, they entered the temple at daybreak and began to teach. Now the high priest Now when the high priest came and those who were with him, they called together the council, all the senate of the people of Israel, and sent to the prison to have them brought. But when the officers came, they did not find them in the prison. So they returned and reported, We found the prison securely locked, and the guards standing at the doors. But when we opened them, we found no one inside. Now when the captain of the temple and the chief priests heard these words, they were greatly perplexed about them, wondering what this would come to. And someone came and told them, Look, the men whom you put in prison are standing in the temple and teaching the people. Then the captain with the officers went and brought them, but not by force, for they were afraid of being stoned by the people. And when they had brought them, they set them before the council. And the high priest questioned them, saying, We strictly charged you not to teach in this name. Yet here you have filled Jerusalem with your teaching, and you intend to bring this man's blood upon us? But Peter and the apostles answered, We must obey God rather than men. The God of our fathers raised Jesus, whom you killed by hanging him on a tree. God exalted him at his right hand as leader and savior, to repentance to Israel and forgiveness of sins. And we are witnesses to these things, and so is the Holy Spirit, whom God has given to those who obey him. When they heard this, they were enraged and wanted to kill them. But a Pharisee in the council named Gamaliel, a teacher of the law held in honor by all people, stood up and gave orders to put the men outside for a little while. And he said to them, "Men of Israel, take care what you are about to do with these men. For before these days, Theudas rose up, claiming to be somebody, and a number of men, about 400, joined him. He was killed, and all who followed him were dispersed and came to nothing. After him, Judas the Galilean rose up in the days of the census and drew away some of the people after him. He too perished, and all who followed him were scattered. So, in the present case, I tell you, keep away from these men and let them alone. For if this plan or this undertaking is of man, it will fail. But if it is of God, you will not be able to overthrow them. You might even be found opposing God." So they took his advice, and when they had called the apostles, they beat them and charged them not to speak in the name of Jesus, and let them go. So now I'm going to read a thought on all this. It's called One Solitary Life, and then we can ponder this a little bit. One Solitary Life. This is about Jesus. He was born in an obscure village, the child of a peasant woman. He grew up in another obscure village where he worked in a carpenter's shop until he was 30. He never wrote a book. He never held an office. He never went to college. He never visited a big city. He never traveled more than 200 miles from the place where he was born. He did nothing of the things usually associated with greatness. He had no credentials but himself. He was only 33. His friends ran away. One of them denied him. He was turned over to his enemies and went through the mockery of a trial. He was nailed to a cross between two thieves. While dying, his executioners gambled for his clothing, the only property he had on earth. When he was dead, he was laid in a borrowed grave through the pity of a friend. 19 centuries have come and gone, and today Jesus is the central figure of the human race and the leader of mankind's progress. All the armies that have ever marched, all the navies that have ever sailed, all the parliaments that have ever sat, all the kings that ever reigned put together have not affected the life of mankind on earth as powerfully as that one solitary life. And for me, that's one of the evidences of the Christian faith. That was a prophecy in Acts 5, that if this is of God, it won't be stopped. And that's the amazing thing, is that the way it has grown, given who Jesus was. He wasn't a military commander, and he didn't have conquering armies. And the way that the gospel spread, it shows that there was a power behind this. Because if you think of all the other religions also at the time that were backed by the Roman Empire, all of them are gone now. So those are some of my thoughts. If you have any, Sandy, and if that relates to Corinthians passage by Habermas that Habermas cites.
Yeah, it's interesting to note that Gamaliel, especially, was the one who pointed this out to the rest of the Pharisees, who then took it upon themselves to beat them and tell them not to keep preaching. He mentions Studius and the Judas the Galilean, but there were also a couple of other uprisings. And I was just reading this in Acts, and there was a paper on it about when Paul had been outside preaching outside when he had returned to Jerusalem, and before he went in as a ritualistic offering to kind of quell the Jews that were thinking that he was, raised the Judaizers, that he was raising riotous actions outside of the temple. And when the centurion came and grabbed him, and then that's before his court date with Felix up in Caesarea Maritima, the centurion asked him, are you the Egyptian? And that always puzzled me. And I found a paper on that there had been a subsequent uprising in Jerusalem by a guy who claimed to be a messianic figure, and he had assembled 400 guys and assembled them at the Mount of Olives, and they were filled with zealotry in trying to take Jerusalem back. But of course that died out. The Egyptian himself, they never named who that guy was. They just called him the Egyptian, and that's why the centurion refers to him in Acts. Escaped, and they never found out who that guy was, and they thought that Paul had been the Egyptian who had come back to again foment an uprising in Jerusalem. So it's interesting, all of the separate uprisings and things that died out because of zealotry, but the love of the Lord pushed this whole thing through. So and no, it has never been quashed. Christianity has survived every onslaught, philosophically, and within the bounds of other countries that have gone, godless Marxist societies, Lenin, Stalin, Hitler, etc. No, Hitler was not a Christian. We can't.
And Mao, yeah. Mao.
And Mao destroying, all the churches in China. And now who has the fastest growing church is in both China and the underground churches in Iran. So Christianity can't die because it is led by a spirit that is, greater than anything man can quash.
Amen. And Michael Brown had he's a Jew who became a Christian, and he's still a Jew. He had an interesting observation because he argues with rabbis, and the rabbis, of course, will have sharp arguments. But he said, "Okay, let me grant everything you just said." And I actually looked at what Orthodox Jews believed about the Messiah. And so what Michael Brown was saying, he said, yes, the Old Testament said that the Messiah will teach the Gentiles about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The Messiah will teach the Gentiles. And we have the Dead Sea Scrolls, so we know that that the Old Testament was before Christ, that this wasn't after the fact. That's an important thing because the Dead Sea Scrolls were radiocarbon dated to be before the time of Christ.
Yeah, 160 BC about 160 BC. Yeah, and Isaiah reads in the NIV, the ESV. I have not compared it against the KJV, but I'll grant that it reads the same as it did then as it does now. It's the same exact. No Amazing. Change at all.
And so it said in the New Testament cited Isaiah as saying, in him the Gentiles will hope. That's not as far as I know, that's not literally there, but that was a description of what Isaiah was teaching. So the Messiah will teach the Gentiles will hope in him. And so Michael Brown just asked the rabbis, I said, can you name one Jew who's taught more to the Gentiles about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob than Jesus?
Yeah.
And in whom do they hope? I said, it's staring you right in the face. And and as I read what the Orthodox Jews of today believe about Messiah, I'm like, that describes Jesus. It's so accurate, and you don't see it. So in addition to the other prophecies, like how Jesus would suffer and die, you have that fact. So Gamaliel was right that if this is of God, it's not going to be stopped. And it wasn't, because you think of all the religions on the earth that could have been extinguished. This one has grown. And I know the Muslims will have something to say, because there are also a large number of people, and I will leave that to David Wood to address about that. Um, but did you have anything about Gary Habermas? I was thinking
Yeah.
you'd mentioned.
Gary Habermas is, if people in the audience haven't seen it, just pull up Gary Habermas's. He's given the speech several times. He's given it at a convocation ceremony at Liberty. He's given it to several audiences. He was debating an atheist philosopher at Oxford, I believe, and he gave the same argument. But 1 Corinthians 15 is probably the best compilation of testimony of eyewitnesses in the entire Bible, that gives the historicity of the early writing and the creeds of the apostles as they wrote them down. Because if you go to, and I don't have 1 Corinthians 15 pulled up, I probably should, so we could read from it. Pardon me, but he said, "I gave to you what I received." Now, in his when he first went up to Jerusalem, his first time he went up, he sat down with I believe it was James and Peter, and I believe John was there. One account says that John was there, but he said, "This is what I've been preaching. This is and this is what you have given to me." So the earliest attestation of what had been written down in wax tablets, not papyrus necessarily, but wax tablets, which is something else I'd like to touch on in a second here, was given within 2 years of the resurrection. And so, when he went out on his missionary journeys, when he wrote the First Corinthians letter, it's basically a remonstration to them. Hey, I told you guys this stuff long ago, what I had received from them. And then
I have it right up here on the screen, Sandy.
Yeah.
Is that it? Is that the passage for "I delivered to you"?
To you before, what I also received. And so that gives the historical credence for early attestation of the resurrection by Paul. Obviously, at the end, Paul said, "In one who was untimely," he goes through was given to the 12, was given to the 500, most of whom are still alive. So basically, go check it out for yourself. And you know what? Let me pull this up. I'll pull it up out of because I reference this in my doctoral dissertation to Gary's. But Gary goes through, and what he does is also he compares the early attestation that is given in 1 Corinthians 15 to the rest of the Bible, and also that he was preaching he was preaching the same gospel. So his meeting Christ in the desert and Christ giving that incredible download, nobody can. I mean, it must have really fried his brain, but he got exactly the same kind of gospel, the same theological messages. And when he went back to Jerusalem the second time, he says in Galatians, I think it's 2:20, that they added nothing to me. And so that is another historical credential that is added into the fact that he was met by Christ in the desert, and he did receive the necessary theological messages that he needed to spread. So both the apostles, who lived and broke bread with Jesus and followed him around, were preaching the same message as was Paul during that time. Let's see if I can pull this up, but I can read. Jesus, way back here, if I can find it. Goodness gracious, just stick with me here, Sal. I'll find it. Goodness.
Actually, take your time. I'm going to read a little bit about Habermas for the viewers.
Sure, go ahead.
In 1985, Habermas debated the then prominent atheist and evidentialist philosopher Antony Flew. Yeah, so Flew stopped being an atheist at some point, so that's why it said the then
Yeah, let me
prominent
add to that
atheist.
just real quick. Anthony Flew and he had been debating for over 20 years, and Gary had been, and they were friends. They were good friends. And he was on John Ankerberg's show, and they actually did a debate on there. And Anthony, used to bounce Gary's kids on his lap, and they were very good friends. But on this entire issue, and the thing that brought Flew to Christ, it didn't bring him to Christ. He became a deist at the end because of the DNA information. He said that this by far, you cannot deny the fact that DNA has a code, and that it is so information dense that one cannot put that fact off. And that's what brought him at least to a warm deism, to say the least. So, and then that kind of rocked the entire world, of atheism, because he had been the most prolific Humean atheist of the 20th century. Everybody quoted Flew continuously. And when he said that, I believe it was in 2004, if memory serves, just before he died, he brought that. But
And
if I can
academia
read
has
this,
forgotten him, and
yeah.
unfortunately, even the Christian world has forgotten this big event. And I think it's provident we were studying this. But before we go on to Habermas, let me just read this for the audience. In 1985, Habermas debated the then prominent atheist and evidentialist philosopher Antony Flew on the question of Jesus' resurrection as a literal and historical physical event before 3,000 attendees. 5 philosophers and 5 professional debate judges judged the debate. Of the philosophers who judged on the content of the debate, 4 voted that Habermas won and the other was undecided. Of the debate judges who voted on the debate technique, 3 voted for Habermas, while 2 voted for Flew. So that was pretty impressive.
Right. And so I just pulled this up. Let's see. And I won't go through the prologue here, but let's see. Where do I want to start? Okay, well, this is from a quote from Timothy Paul Jones, Dr. Timothy Paul Jones down at Southern Baptist, who I was blessed to have as an instructor down there, a professor. And he is one of the foremost experts, on Bible, on fragments, on textual criticism, etc. But Timothy Paul Jones notes, quote, if Paul had altered this testimony between the time he first taught the Corinthians and the moment he wrote this letter, the members of the Corinthian church would have noticed the changes, but Paul hadn't changed his message in the least. And it was the same message that Paul repeated in city after city as he crisscrossed the Roman Empire, close quote. The cross, let's see. So it's interesting to note that Paul emphasizes Peter in this passage as he had been there during his absence, which adds to the historicity, as does his own verification of his conversion in what I also received, close quote. Also, Paul gives a wonderful clue of, quote, according to the scriptures, close quote, which would indicate that in some respects, scripture was being recorded in some form, whether in wax tablets or some other media form, as he preached, as preached by the church in Jerusalem. Christian historian Gary Burge notes, quote, we should also remember that Paul wrote his letters using an amanuensis secretary who would have taken dictation on wax tablets before transcribing the work on papyrus, and we know that papyrus was pretty expensive to buy back then. Thus, we are more surprised by the document's cohesion than its multicolored contents. Typographically, according to the scripture, close quote, would have referred to Isaiah 52, 53, and many of the old predictions of the Old Testament. Craig Keener notes, the scriptures probably refer to an assortment of texts such as Psalm 16 and Isaiah 53, 12. If the third day is also in view in, quote, according to the scriptures, close quote, perhaps it alludes to Hosea 6:2, Jonah 1:17, and other texts, although Paul may include the phrase simply to say, according to the Jewish custom, that Jesus was raised before he could see corruption, Psalm 16:10. And there's several other typographical influences. And I see in the chat, Patrick was talking about the guy being swallowed by the whale being, there was a guy actually swallowed by a whale. He came out and was, I guess his skin was completely bleached white. But Jonah also, we remember he was swallowed by the whale for 3 days, and then whether he was dead or alive, when he was disgorged from the whale, he rose again. So it's a typographical type of Jesus, just the same as when Paul was blinded in the desert. Remember, the scales were on his eyes for 3 days. And so that's another kind of spiritual resurrection that is a typographical back to being to resurrection itself.
Now, I wanted to just share with the audience here, some of them have heard this. So you were saying that, just to update the audience, so I graduated Dulles Aviation Flight School, and only a few years later, probably, some years later, Sandy here is calling my same flight school to enroll in. And then the Lord tells him, you're not going to do this. You're going to go off to seminary and in Bible school. And one of the professors there is Gary Habermas at Liberty University. I feel that God gave you a sign confirming that you're in the right place.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
If you could relate that.
We're going to rehash that one out.
Huh? Oh, please. I mean, there are people here that need encouragement, brother.
So, I was in my second, the semesters, if you're doing online at Liberty, they're 8 weeks long, extremely packed with assignments and readings. So, I'd come home from work and then I'm hitting the books for 3 to 4 hours every night. But I'm reading a book by Mike Licona and Gary Habermas that on the resurrection of Jesus. And on page 106, what they were doing was trying to denounce the common atheist objection that Paul had a hallucination in the desert, which belies the fact that Scripture says that even the temple guards who were accompanying Paul, heard something going on. They just couldn't see anything. But so Habermas went out, and not only did he investigate the DSM-4 manual from the American Psychiatric Association. You guys are probably familiar with that, about hallucinations, because Paul didn't meet any of the criteria. There's 4 criteria for hallucinations. But he also undauntedly went to look at one of the most prominent places where people are, in essence, are forced to experience hallucinations, and that was in SEAL training during what we call Hell Week, which is the 5th week. And as we, it's usually Thursday night. Well, it depends on how they're doing the evolution and how cold the water is, but we do what's called, I think it was Wednesday, it was early Thursday morning, it's about 2:30 in the morning, and we're paddling along, and it's called the Around the World, where you start at the Bud's compound in the ocean, and then we paddle around Coronado Island, go underneath the Coronado Bay Bridge, and then back in, and then they proceed to run us to breakfast or do whatever we're going to do, have more fun in the mud. But when you're doing that paddle, that's when guys start hallucinating, because you've had about an hour and a half. We had about an hour and a half of sleep up until that time, and you start
for a whole week.
Yeah, and you're just paddling along. It's quiet out, and guys start to see things. One guy saw a tiger jumping off the bridge. And another guy saw a train coming straight at us. And they start screaming while you're paddling. I saw when I was a college swimmer, we had these junk swimming suits that just by this company called Gulbenkian, and their little mascot, as all these swimming companies have little mascots, was a purple octopus that, is tattooed, or it's sewn onto the side of these training swimming suits. Well, I will swear to this day that I saw that octopus waving at me from the ocean as I looked back. I was in the back of the boat, steering the boat. And so when we got done with that evolution, they put us in the classroom because they can't run you that much anymore. And nobody quits after Wednesday. It's just, unless you are really, really sick, or have pneumonia or something, nobody quits. And they make you write an essay. Well, which is hilarious because everybody gets a sheet of legal pad and a pencil and you're writing in it, you inevitably fall off like this. And so you have to go hit the surf zone if you fall asleep. They tell you don't fall asleep. Well, that's an inevitable thing. But I wrote down on there that I had seen this purple octopus, and the training master chief and I had gotten hurt, and before this I'd separated my shoulder. So I was in there working for him, doing various things till I classed back up. So he came past us to see how I was doing. He's a great sea daddy, Rick Nepper, and he just busted out laughing. He thought that was the funniest thing in the world. I'll never know why he thought that was so funny with all the crazy things that happened. But Habermas had come out there afterwards, and Rick Nepper gave him that piece of paper. And it ended up in his book on page 106, The Resurrection of Christ by Lacona. And I was reading that book for class, and I'm drinking a Coca-Cola, and I nearly spit the thing out. And I immediately contacted Dr. Habermas and said, hey, sir, I'm the guy who saw the purple octopus. And so we've had kind of a correspondence back and forth, and he has affectionately named me the purple octopus guy. so it's very funny, but yeah, talk about, again, divine providence in action. I mean, how did that get set up? We always say that, there are no coincidences. And when I received Christ, I got the review of all the coincidences in my life that led up to that moment. And I've told audiences when I've gone up to do some apologetics preaching, I did it up in Baltimore. It was a church plant we were doing. I said, ask your people who you're trying to bring into the fold of God, to Jesus, bring them to Jesus, and so that they are infused with the Holy Spirit. Ask them about their coincidences, and because they aren't. God is always pushing us to get to that main railroad track and the rail yard to get us on that narrow path into the kingdom of glory. So those coincidences are to, maybe bad coincidence, but it's all for God's glory and his providence. But it is also to push you to that point where you are brought to the point where you will give your life to Jesus and be truly saved. So, I offer that as coincidences are not, and I go over that ad nauseum with people, and they get sick of me hearing saying that, but it's just amazing. And you may be in turbulent times, but there is probably a reason why you're in turbulent times. But anyway, getting back to that, but
I felt that would mean something to a lot of
absolutely
our audience, because they're people that they need to kind of reflect on their life and be reminded God was there for you.
Yeah.
And there are times when I've been very discouraged, and it's like, it's not like God hasn't done things in my life that it seems to just defy the odds.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there are people that know this. God's quietly kind of nudging you along. And as I said, sometimes the way he reaches out to people is not so strong that they can't turn away. He always makes it just like in the Garden of Eden. And the times he's testing people, he'll give you a chance to change, to leave him. He's testing you to see if you're going to stay.
Yeah. And I don't want to get into a Calvinist and anti. We actually need some night, Sal. I would think that we need to bring in guys who, like Veckel and a couple of guys who are in the Calvinist camp. And God bless them. It's not. I would love to have a discussion. Yeah. I've been watching a lot of Leighton Flowers and Provisionism, Molinism, etc. Very interesting. But I've also, as I told you, we never read in all the seminary training I had, we never were assigned to read institutes. And so I've gone through this. I just finished it last night, and it's amazing to me. And I don't know if I'm missing something here. And I was hoping that guys who are adhere to TULIP, etc., would come in and have a discussion on this, because I will tell you, I think that Calvin himself, in his own words, in the very first paragraph of his book, destroys total depravity, and gives credence to a middle knowledge, or at least a compatibilistic free will jargon within theology, and I have not been able to find anything within the confines of his own works that discount that. I mean, here it is. I mean, this is 5 lines into his first chapter. For there exists in man something in a world of misery, and ever since we were stripped of divine attire, our naked shame discloses an immense series of disgraceful properties. Every man, being stung by the consciousness of his own unhappiness, in this way necessarily obtains at least some knowledge of God. Well, that right away takes total depravity and flushes it. The opening sentences of Calvin's own words. And I've gone through and underlined a whole bunch of stuff in here. And I will tell you that it seems to me that the TULIP axiom was extrapolated from something, or has morphed from something else. And I can't find anywhere except within Augustine's writings, and at the end of his life, where he was in extreme political turmoil with the church, that maybe some of this was put into writing, and that Calvin at some point had extrapolated some things out of it, but I can't find it in his own writing. So anyway, so I would offer that up, but I think we're still back on 1 Corinthians 15.
Well, thank you for sharing about Gary Habermas. And just for the audience, I've said I'm evangelical reformed, but I resist the Calvinist label. There's too much baggage with it. And I'll just simply say this, is that for me, I feel that as a believer today, I got breaks that I totally did not deserve. And I wonder, it's like, okay, how did I end up in the United States and get to hear the gospel and be raised up? At the time, it was a Christian country. On the other hand, it's just like what I was saying, the feeling of God providing and having apparent foresight into my life.
Yeah.
And ordaining things. It's like, I know you're going to be here, and you're going to be here.
Yeah.
And
well,
these things will happen.
Nicholas just put into the chat. Hey, Nicholas, how you doing, brother? I don't understand how that flushes total depravity. Well, the argument that I have heard from various Calvinists is that we don't have any ability to know God unless God directly enters our life, of those who, and I think the word elect is misnomered, but that's, again, I don't want to go down through theological rabbit holes here. I'd love to have been to discuss it, but I mean, it's Calvin's words. If we are so totally depraved, then how do we have a consciousness, which directly violates Romans 1:18 through 20? So it's there seems to be there's some kind of disconnect, and I don't know where it comes from. I'd love someone to show me where, and I offer this interrogatively, not in the accusative or other way, or rhetorically. I'm seriously confused on that, because all throughout Calvin's writings in this book, I am shown where he talks about the knowledge of God, and that each man possesses that. And it also directly reflects back, yes, we fell, but we were still made in the image of God. So do you flush the image of God immediately away? So I guess that's, in a sense, something that I'm not wrestling with so much. I'm not. I don't believe Tulip is correct, but I'm open to somebody changing my opinion on that and showing me the scriptural evidence that we are so depraved that we can't have the ability to know God, because why would we then be put through all of this and have a sense? Everybody has a sense of God. I think even atheists do, or they wouldn't be rebelling against it. That's an apologetic right there. So anyway, I know this was absolutely a time for another discussion, but
Yes,
um,
and just to close the thought out, just speaking for myself, I'm very much a minimalist. I don't like piling a lot of interpretation on scripture. I'd
yeah,
like to just read scriptures, and I believe God can teach his people. I believe God does teach people from the scriptures, and they will understand the essential meaning. They don't need all this theological stuff. I've gotten a lot, I've learned a lot just studying the Bible over and over again
yeah. I mean,
rather than theological works. That's just
I've learned
who I
stuff
am.
from Nicholas. I've learned stuff from Smokey. I've learned stuff from LPP. And that's why I like these channels, is because we can test our own worldviews and see if they are correct. There was a wonderful SFT put on a debate between Matt Powell and Smokey the other night, and it was really well done. And both guys, I think to me, it was almost a draw. There were some things that I disagree with Matt on. There were some things I disagree with Smokey on, but overall, it was a very theologically well presented debate. And I told SFT that this is the kind of rhetorical back and forth that we need as brothers to make sure that we are, when we go out to spread the gospel, that we are giving, a true account of what theology proposes. I learned from everybody on these channels. Yeah, I got a doctorate, big deal. I'm learning every day something new, and
Great.
it's awesome. So but anyway, if you want to go back, I wanted to go back to 1 Corinthians 15.
Yes, and
Um,
you're talking something about the Apostles' Creed, and you're saying that
yeah, um,
it's evidence. This
yeah,
passage is evidence that that creed was handed down.
right. So let's see.
And
Well,
I'll
first
put
I
it
wanted
up
to
on the
read.
screen here.
Yeah, I wanted to read something that Craig Blomberg. If you've never read his book on the New Testament, it's excellent, and it only came out a few years ago. But let's see. Okay, one of the things that Habermas points out in his what's called the minimal facts argument for 1 Corinthians 15 is the creedal forms that Paul talks about, that there are these things that are, like the creeds that were given in the earliest forms of oral history, so that people could get together, recite them, and then be able to write them down. And he cites the creedal forms that are used in 1 Corinthians 15 as evidence that these things were formed, within 2 years. And even and I'll just read this quote. Craig Blomberg, cites from atheist New Testament scholar. Yes, there are atheist New Testament scholars, Bart Ehrman and Gerd Ludemann. But Gerd Ludemann, who is respected by guys, in the theological community as being excellent scholars. Quote, Ludemann explains that the heart of this creed must have been established by the time of Paul's own conversion, which had to have been within 2 to 3 years of Jesus' death, in light of the sum total of New Testament data. But that information was passed along to Paul in Damascus, a distance from Jerusalem. So a longer period of time would have been needed for the early Christian leaders to formulate the foundational creedal elements of their fledgling faith and spread the word to places as far away as Syria, that these were the truths to be taught to the new converts. Again, creedal forms, oral history, that's the way we remember things. We all remember nursery rhymes as kids. Ludemann persuasively argues, therefore, that the belief in Christ's bodily resurrection must have emerged in a Jewish context within 1 to 2 years of Jesus' death. This argument alone obliterates many theories of stories of Jesus' resurrection being modeled on Greco-Roman myths and emerging only after Christianity was well entrenched throughout the empire generations or more later. And Gary actually did Gary Habermas did a debate with, what's that gent's name? I can't remember. Tim Callahan, who is the editor of Skeptic Magazine. And Tim was trying to make the argument that resurrection stories had been copied from ancient myths. Well, Gary convincingly told him that there are no resurrection stories, either in any kind of written manuscript until well within 200 to 400 AD with Mithras. And any of those vase paintings, that's all that Tim Callahan had for evidence, was vase paintings and Greek mythology. That none of that made any sense, and there was nothing, ever there was no evidence with any historicity that would confirm that the resurrection story was copied. And so that last sentence, and this is an atheist New Testament scholar. Mm-hmm. This argument alone obliterates many theories of stories of Jesus' resurrection being modeled on Greco-Roman myths and emerging only after Christianity was well entrenched throughout the empire, generations or more later. So I think that's a proof or a proof of text, if one can define it as such. And then I went on to say, noted apologist Gary Habermas uses 1 Corinthians as one of the primary defenses of the historicity of the main tenets of Christ and his resurrection. He supports Ludemann's notation and creedal form when he states several factors mark this as an ancient creed that was part of the earliest traditions of the Christian church and that predate the writings of Paul. In fact, many critical scholars hold that Paul received it from the disciples Peter and James while visiting them in Jerusalem 3 years after his conversion. If so, Paul learned it within 5 years of Jesus' crucifixion and from the disciples themselves. At a minimum, we have source material that dates within 2 decades of the alleged event of Jesus' resurrection and comes from a source that Paul thought was reliable. Dean John Rogers of Trinity Episcopal School for Ministry comments, this is the sort of data that historians drool over. So, and in that lecture that Gary gives on this, what's called the minimal facts argument, he goes and talks about different historical treatises that were written hundreds of years, after the fact. The stories of Alexander the Great, and many of those, are written because one of the main atheist talking points is that this was written decades, after the fact, whereas Paul's epistles predate the Gospels, obviously, and that those creedal forms were already established and probably written on wax tablets. One of the fascinating things I saw in, if you haven't watched The Chosen, was, pardon me, the Apostle Matthew. And they the way they portray him is just kind of funny, but he is always writing down on wax tablets, and I found that fascinating that he was constantly writing everything that Christ was saying along the way, and he became the main scribe, for lack of a better word, at least as it's portrayed. But one can, extrapolate that because of his background as a tax collector, he's very detail oriented, and that this was written from a Jewish perspective. So the moving on, let's see, I think that's all I wrote with respect to Gary. Okay, well, one last thing. In 1 Corinthians 15:3-8, we find, this is Mike Licona in the same book. In 1 Corinthians 15:3-8, we find very early tradition about the resurrection of Christ, the contents of which can be traced with a high degree of probability to the Jerusalem apostles. Acts 15, which, pardon me, documents the Council of Jerusalem, again solidifies the teachings of Paul as being correct from what he had been given by both Christ and the apostles, and eschews the Judaizers who had preceded or followed him through his missionary journeys. And we can go through the verses 15 through 19, and this is a whole exegesis that I had to do as part of my doctoral dissertation. So, but if you haven't seen, pardon me, uh, uh, any of that of Gary's minimal facts argument, it's well worth watching. It lasts about an hour, but he gives that alone. And he also cites secular scholars, that all of this had to have been uh, within the bounds of credence for the historicity of Paul's texts. So, which I found absolutely wonderful. And that's just one piece that we can find textually. Pardon me, for the historicity of not only the epistles but themselves.
This is an angle I've not really studied very much for the New Testament, and I could see this could be a very rich topic. Uh, how did it? I can tell you, the more that I've studied this, it's helped my faith. Sometimes it highlights problems that are challenging, and I'll actually talk about that if we have time. But then, by and large, that's why there are people like J. Warner Wallace, who's a murder detective, and he was looking at all this, and he said, "Yeah, this has the ring of truth," because he's so used to finding people that have conspired to make up a story. And he said, "This just, it just has that ring of truth," and that's the comment I've gotten, and that's also even in my little layman understanding of analyzing text. I said, "Yeah, there's something about it," because I've read diaries, and a lot of the Gospels read like you would find a diary. It's not like some scripted thing. It's just like you have all these kind of random things, and people just remember the oddest things, and that's just how it's like stuff is like, this doesn't, if it were submitted as a manuscript, so to speak, to be published by a novelist, like some of these fiction publishing houses, it's like it'd be rejected because it doesn't follow and kind of the a structure of a work of fiction.
Yeah,
It
exactly.
looks
And
like a bunch of fragmented facts.
yeah, and we got to remember that oral history, even in the madrasas, they practice oral history all the time. You can say what you want about Islam, and I don't want to. I don't want to go there. We'll leave that to Sam Shimon and to
Oh, Shams Ramon.
and hey, Sam's great, man. He's awesome. There's a couple things I disagree
Awesome.
with him on, but I tell you, that guy, he has a photographic memory of both the Quran and the Bible that is just incredible. But that having been said, I guess to close out this thing, uh, uh, I wanted to read one thing that Craig Blomberg had said. He said, in Disputation of the Christian Movement as Myth, Craig Blomberg adds, quote, had the gospel first emerged in Athens and Rome after a generation, this scenario of gospel as myth might have certain elements of plausibility to it. Bodily resurrection was not countenanced in the pre-Christian Greco-Roman world, whereas, except among the Sadducees, it was the norm for the Jews. One could then envision the story of a spiritual resurrection being told repeatedly and over time morphing into an account of an increasingly bodily nature as the gospel left Greek and Roman circles and took root in Jewish ones. But of course, that is exactly backwards for the actual sequence of events. Close quote. And we know and Gary countenanced, there was a resurrection myth that was started among the Roman centurions, as a matter of fact, of Mithras, that was between 200 and 400 AD, that never gained any traction, but it was a favorite in Roman circles. Probably some kind of a bravado thing that Romans would live forever, or Roman centurions would live forever. But as what was that in Gladiator? If you're dead, you're in Elysium, and Elysium was the Roman, because they had adopted some Jewish pretexts. The Roman Empire always kind of absorbed other nations, other conquered nations' gods as their own, as they did with the Greeks. But Elysium refers to that part of Hades that was Abraham's bosom. And you feel the sun on your face and the grass below your feet. Don't worry about it. You're already in Elysium. So that was kind of an interesting thing he said before he sent his troops into battle against the Germanic tribes in that scene. So.
Opening scene. Oh yeah, I remember it. For our audience, I put something in the chat just to close out some thoughts, and I want to give a hat tip to Mr. Jetty 89. He's one of the regular viewers here. He gave me something that was a little farther out in time than what we've been discussing here, which was the codification of like First Corinthians and all. It was, again, as where J. Warner Wallace had said, this chain of custody of the written documents, the accounts, how it's been transmitted over time. And this covers the time from, like, say, 80, maybe the first and second century. And it was by Tim McGrew. Now, when I first heard that name, I said, isn't he a country singer? That's Tim McGraw. So, the former husband of Faith Hill.
Yeah.
I'm just like, I didn't know he became a theologian.
Yeah.
Like, what was that about? Anyway, Timothy McGrew, Dr. Timothy McGrew, he teaches it. He told me, well, he didn't tell me. He said on the video, I'm sorry, I linked it in the chat here, that he teaches at a secular school. And I found that interesting, or maybe I misheard it. So someone correct me if I got that wrong. But he really pointed out some difficulties with kind of this late, kind of the mythicism. He was saying you had all these people like in Egypt and all these other places across the Roman Empire that are geographically separated. And that's all I remember. I should watch the video again. And because of, as I said earlier in the show, I'm concerned about trying to make sure I have copyrights and all. If I figure that out and I can play it, I'll play sections of it here in some of the variety shows.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting, you bring up a great point, because J. Warner Wallace goes through an evidence chain, and as anybody who's done forensics, I've had to do forensics in my military and contractor career. You have a chain of evidence that can't be broken. And he goes through and shows the chain of evidence from, the Gospels that were written and then sent out, to various places. Tatian took off with a bunch of Gospels, went to Syria, and those Gospels were spread throughout the Roman Empire, the same manuscripts. And then when they're brought back together, they all basically say the same thing. There's some scribal errors and some things like that, but basically all say the same thing. And his point was that because it wasn't like Islam was recorded, when Uthman had gathered all of the documents together and then had a group of scribes then take all of the sayings that Muhammad had said and written them down, he had all the other evidence burned. So there are no manuscripts that remain, with the exception of what Uthman had put down. That's one thing that Sam Shamoon was talking about the other night. It was fascinating. But anyway.
Oh, please say hi to Mrs. Pidgeon for me.
They're saying hi to you. Say hello. So, okay. Is she getting a ride home? Okay. So
I have a. Before I forget, when you all came over to my house, I promised an aloe vera plant. I prepared one for you also when I drive up there.
Okay.
We'll have to hang out. And I also did hear about your newfound church, Cornerstone, in the news. And,
if those guys in the audience haven't heard, but it has been national news. Tanner Cross, who is an elementary school PE teacher, stood up, and this has been the Loudoun County. Let me give you a little context. Amazon and Microsoft have come into areas within Fairfax and especially Loudoun County. Loudoun County was, solidly Republican farm area. They've bought up all this land, and they have put these data farms out there. These things are absolutely enormous. If you drive along Route 28, Sal, coming up here, you're going to see these buildings that have no parking lots. They're just 300 and 400 yards long, just data centers. Well, with that, a lot of blue money, shall we say, came in, and the county flipped in 2 years. And Loudoun County now is they are promoting critical race theory, intersectionality, the use of pronouns and all the rest of this stuff. Well, Tanner Cross and there have been several people, teachers, etc., that have stood up and said this is nonsense. And we're not gonna put up with a tyrannical school board, trying to shove this down everybody's throats. He stood up and said, "I'm not going to teach this, and you can do what you want." Well, the next day they suspended him and told him he couldn't come back to school. Well, the Alliance Defending Freedom, pardon me, whose lawyer Michael Ferris is a congregant at Cornerstone. They took up his case. They got a temporary injunction. Tanner was reinstated. However, the Loudoun County School Board has gone back since and said, no, we are not going to let Tanner come back and teach basically next year. So they are in a fight right now. But I will tell you that this has become a center of gravity for political activism in the schools in this county. And should they succeed, this could affect the entire country. Now you'll see in YouTube snippets here and there that people are standing up at their school boards and saying enough is enough. But it would seem to me that because Loudoun County is, in its proximity to Washington, D.C., this has become a focus of national attention for the inception of critical race theory, intersectionality, the ridiculous use of pronouns, which Jordan Peterson talks about a lot with Canadian Bill 10, that if they win here, they can win every place. So it is a big-time fight. Well, Tanner is a congregant here at Cornerstone Chapel in Leesburg, and the pastor, Gary Hamrick, has stood up and said, we're going to support Tanner, and we're not going to support these unbiblical principles in the schools. God bless them. So please say a prayer for Tanner's. Please say prayers for Gary Hamrick and for Cornerstone Chapel, because the assault is here now. And we got to remember something. We as Christians have had it pretty easy in this country. Persecution is here, and persecution is now. And we're either going to stand up now or we're not. So...
Well, it's amazing. You and I, Sandy and I have been in high-profile churches in the D.C. area and getting news. President Trump visited our church at McLean Bible, and that caused a lot going on. And the church Sandy and I were a part of, McLean Bible, we're no longer a part. Sandy left, and then, I suspended my membership. The church I'm a part of, the elders were resisting Governor Northam's order to...
Go ahead. I'll be up in a minute.
You need to take care of something, Sandy? I'll take over
Go
for
ahead.
a while.
My wife just pointed out another teacher, pardon me, who was just on Fox News the other night talking to... Who was she talking to? Oh, she was talking to Tammy Bruce, who's a Fox News analyst, Lilith Van Etzen. She's a teacher in Fairfax County who went to the Loudoun County School Board and basically stood up and said, enough's enough. We're going to fight you here and right now, and you're not going to put this stuff in. Very courageous young lady, very smart.
I grew up in Fairfax County. I went to Jeb Stuart High School, which is, I don't know, they've renamed it because that was offensive. And I'm just like, oh, all right, whatever.
Yeah.
But,
I think they did rename Jeb Stuart High School, but yeah.
So Um, well, and then McLean has been, and then I was saying about, so uh, I rejoined the local congregation here at Occoquan Bible, and Governor Northam was keeping, they said they have to shut the churches down because of the coronavirus, but they're keeping abortion clinics and liquor stores open and letting people protest without masks out in the open if it happened to be their particular cause. And the elders at this church were fighting on who's going to volunteer to go to jail if the authorities, and thankfully the authorities didn't, weren't enforcing the government order, the governor's order. And so they were holding services outside. And as far as I could tell, there should have been no problem with it. And the church actually grew during this time. And
Right.
I'd like to share, I'd like to share uh, a little bit about one of
Okay.
my elders, Jared Bridges. He works for the Family Research Council, and he was nearly assassinated several years ago by Floyd Lee Corkins. They call him the Chick-fil-A killer assassin,
Yeah.
and the guard uh, took a bullet in the attempt. The assailant was going to go into the office and just shoot all the employees of Family Research Council, but the guard took a bullet in his arm, and that same arm pinned the assailant to the wall. Like, that's one tough guy, and disarmed him. And Floyd Lee Corkins um, has been sentenced and then sent to jail. So uh, this is really hitting close to home, where Christian brothers and sisters, their lives are at risk. So, we may feel safe. I mean, I felt safe in the United States as a Christian, but I no longer do. When I hearing stuff like that, it's just hitting so close to home. And my church is only like a mile or walking distance from where I am, and the government could have been shutting it down. And in Canada, they're locking up the churches. So we're thinking about going underground. Um, Let me acknowledge Dr. Dan here, because we're going to be we're in negotiations to have a show, and I just wanted to say we were just mentioning critical race theory in passing, because we were talking about just news events on Fox News, because our churches happen to be in the news, in the national news, and then it's also we're in the local area where all this is happening. I used to be in Fairfax County, and Loudoun County is nearby. That's the adjacent county. I'm here in Prince William County, so all of this is going down here. And so, being near Washington D.C., it's also, a place where there's just a lot of politics. You can't run away from it. So, um, if you'll forgive me, Dr. Dan, we can talk about this elsewhere. I had some other things on the program, and I just wanted to talk about, just briefly, maybe if I can get some of the copyrights released to Tim McGrew's talk, we can share it on this channel, and because I thought it was just excellent on the chain of custody of the Gospels. So I think we could have very fruitful discussions here on archaeology and the history of the Bible. So I did have some more things I wanted to share with people.
Yeah. Hey,
Sandy,
Sal, just real quick. I'm just reading the chats here. Is Dr. Dan creation myths?
oh, Dr. Dan is he's an evolutionary biologist.
Yeah. No, but that's who
These
creation
creation
myths is.
myths,
Okay. Okay.
yes.
Yeah. Hey, Dr. Dan, the critical race theory is born out of, if you really want to go back to its roots, it's Hegelian theory, Aufleben, and I'll get that and have and ask Sal to post it in the chat so you can watch. There's a very good. I watched a dialogue on it with a mathematician, as a matter of fact, James Lindsay. I think I sent that to you, Sal, already, and you might want to post that in the chat. But it goes through how this morphed from Hegelian theory,
yeah.
and Hegel basically was trying to find a German folksy religion that eschewed Christianity, and you see that Hitler glommed onto that, Marx glommed onto it, but turned it on its head and made it an economic theory. But basically, all of the Marxists took the basics of critical theory that Hegel had put in a philosophical language. Marx made it into an economic language, as did Lenin, Mao, and Stalin. And basically, it's the termination of anything that does not begat the state becoming the replacement for God. And Solzhenitsyn has said in his Templeton Address, I believe in 1970, that basically we forgot God. So critical race theory is just using collectivization of identities of people rather than economics to divide and conquer. It's an interesting, really interesting lecture that James Lindsay gives on this whole thing. It lasts about an hour, but you can see the roots of where this really started. It really started with Hegel. But Marx just took it. He took it a step further, as did Feuerbach, pardon me, and a couple other of the Frankfurt School, and pushed that through. So BLM, Black Lives Matter, and has said, I mean, Patrice Cullors has said, we are trained Marxists. And so they are using Marxist theory overall of critical theory and inserting the preposterous notion of race in there. You know, there's only, which is unbiblical because there's only one race, there's a human race. So this is an attempt, it's just basic Marxist ideology anew, but they're very, very good at it because what they do is what's called Aufleben, and Aufleben is to preserve what is going on now, but break down the definitions of what is always been held or true definitions. You know, is a boy and is a girl a girl? Well, no. Now there's this new thing called gender identity, which is preposterous. But anyway, it's just a breakdown of cultural norms. It is a breakdown so that they can replace it with what they think will be utopia, which they believe is the end state, the teleological state, which will be the utopia is the state. But they believe that at the end state of that the state will go away, which is ridiculous. I mean, that's all you have to do is look at Marxist history to find out that that's not what happens. Anyway, I'll put, we can probably get that in the chat, Sal. People can watch that.
I found it. I posted it.
Excellent.
Yeah, and so thank you. By the way, the next time you're in the chat, I will make you a moderator. That's just an oversight on my part. Usually when if you type something now, I'll make you a moderator. So you can also post links there.
Brother, I'll probably screw it up and the whole channel will implode. So don't do that, you know. I am a self-admitted non-electronic wizard. So
well, you've been so generous with your time. It's coming up on 2 hours, and I can continue on the rest of the show solo, but if you wanted to stick around and hear some of the rest of the stuff that I had on the docket. So these variety shows are something I really look forward to. And one reason I've been spending a lot of time with it is this house is really empty right now.
Yeah.
The internet is kind of my family, the Christian brothers and sisters. I mean, it's been great to be part of the Christian fellowship back in my congregation, but we only meet every now and then. And sometimes when I'm feeling kind of lonely, I got to tell you, it's nice that I can just start a stream and just say hi to my brothers and sisters. Because, there are days it's kind of like if I didn't have, to the audience and my supporters, if I didn't have you all, it'd be really rough going. So this is a chance for us to fellowship and talk about the Lord and remember. And so I'll post what you just sent me here, Sandy, when one moment.
Yeah, and I'm just reading the chats again. Forgive me for reading the chats here, but to Dr. Dan, it actually is a spiritual question because the God is being replaced by the state. That's
Yeah.
really the fundamental issue, and the destruction of American history, the rewriting of it. And in fact, I'll give you a better example, and you can look this up on YouTube because there was a lady of who grew up in Mao's revolution. She spoke at the Loudoun County School Board a couple of nights ago, and she said she lived through the Red Guards Revolution, and she sees the exact same things happening by Antifa and BLM that happened with the Red Guards: the destruction of statues, the destruction of anything that had any historical value in Chinese culture. Confucianism, is gone. Although it remained somewhat, but the destruction of the culture to make it anew and destroy the worth of the individual, which is a primary focus of the Declaration of Independence, if you reread that, and God being the ultimate source of authority and not man. That throughout history, throughout Marxism, socialism, Nazism, etc., has always been the end state to replace God with the state, and so gender is gender. There's male and female, and this gender identity is it's nonsense. It's more to start to question things that are cultural norms. Again, breaking down the cultural society, the cultural norms of the cultural pillars of society is, as Gramsci said, who was a great influence on Il Duce, that you have to break down the codified pillars of society and replace them with Marxist ideology. So it very much is about breaking norms. I mean, this whole nonsense about letting boys into girls' bathrooms, this is to create chaos, and that's what it's all about.
Well, as I said, Sandy, we can. I don't want to keep you away from your family here, but I'm going to, just for the sake of the audience, I did have some things on my docket here to talk about, including genetic entropy. If you want to hang out, that's fine, but I really thank you for the 2 hours.
Yeah. Hey, Sal, can I ask you just a question? We were talking, sure. I think we were talking about with Emery about phenotypic plasticity. And I know this may not be on your docket or not, but genetic entropy, does that play into, and Dr. Dan Biddle had given a really great talk on why people had lived, to be 900 years old, and he gave a genetic entropy curve that was based on analysis of, because God decreed that we would only live to 120 years. Your years will be 120, but he gives that curve, and it literally, you can't get any mathematically any better mathematical credential out of that. It was really,
we call that an
fascinating
exponential decay curve. Yes.
Yeah, it was absolutely fascinating. But the phenotypic, well, I tell you what. Why don't you go ahead with your? I'll talk to you about this some other time. But
just along those lines, when I just since we brought the topic up, and I am going to cover a little bit of genetic entropy, that decay curve is also a similar argument was made by Dr. Brian Sykes at Oxford in his book Adam's Curse. He's not a creationist at all. But he's citing the decay in fertility, and I could be misquoting this because it's been a long time since I've read his book, but I definitely recognize that the math I will recognize.
Yeah.
And he's giving the human race 100,000 years.
Interesting.
He also constructed independently an exponential decay curve. Of course, it's not excuse me, it's not the same thing that Dr. Sanford was talking about, but it's interesting that he's talking about the decline of humanity, and he's also showing that curve. And maybe I even have it in his book, an actual curve. and he's giving humanity about 100,000 years. So when I talk about what I said to the Christians last night, and I apologize to Dr. Dan, I know he came out to hear possibly some of my talk about genetic entropy, and I didn't, for some reason it was on my docket and I just missed it. And I'm like, oh my goodness, when I was rereading what I was supposed to talk about, what I signed up for, and like, I totally forgot to talk about GE, genetic entropy. And so I did try to close that out. And last night I just said to the readers, I said, I know you guys, I appreciate the fact you respect the creation scientists and you want to promote their work. But if you're defending the idea to the world, don't quote creationists because we have such a bad reputation. Quote secular literature. Quote the people that are concerned about the decay of the human genome, because there's lots of them that are concerned. They may not, they'll say it's just modern medicine, this or that. But the consent to all the major geneticists, I don't know a single one that thinks we're improving.
Yeah,
Almost
it's interesting
that
you brought up Barrow and Tipler too, because I cited that. I've cited that a couple of times in papers, and and that is a hard read. But William Lane Craig cited that to Christopher Hitchens in a debate, so that the instance of humans becoming humans, given mutation theory, would take. What was the quote? It would take so much time that the sun would cease to be a main sequence star.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Got to credit William Lane Craig. Even I didn't find that, and I'm a physics student, and that was a brutal book.
Yeah.
And even now, I would be challenged to read it, and I'd need to study physics for another 3 years, and then I could maybe halfway feel comfortable.
Yeah.
But that was definitely a breakthrough book, and it's really funny. In the ID community, half of them liked it, half of them didn't, because it wasn't really exactly in line with the ID that you usually hear. But I said, this is actually a gold mine, because this is coming from respected secular physicists, cosmologists, and astronomers, and they're like handing you on a silver platter an ID argument, which was what I was calling atheist ID. So, speaking of which, this is actually on the docket. The next thing on the docket, this book, Mathematics of Evolution by Fred Hoyle.
Oh yeah, Fred Hoyle. Yeah.
And so
Fred Hoyle has said that famously that physics, chemistry, and biology have been monkeyed with by some kind of an intelligent agent.
Intellect.
Yeah.
So I'm just, even though the body of ID literature and the participation by atheists is only less than maybe 1%. So I'll just give a figure 1%, because I know it has to be small. They've been disproportionately influential in moving forward the ID argument in the modern day, because, as I mentioned when I was talking to Emery yesterday, I said it's the power of the hostile witness. They have actually the opposite agenda, and they're saying this just doesn't add up, everything that we're hearing, and they're coming out and speaking against the viewpoints of their peers and saying, hey, time out, guys. What you say doesn't line up with everything else we know about physics and chemistry. And so even though the mathematics of evolution may have some issues in the way he formulates his argument, I think his intuitions are correct. And if anything, over time, it's gotten stronger against the neo-Darwinian case. And I'll cite as evidence of that is the fact that we have this thing called the third way of evolution that's come out in response to neo-Darwinism. So evolutionary biologists themselves and biologists are saying, hey, they're we don't want to give fodder to the creationists, but they do have a point. And so Fred Hoyle was, could kind of be said to be among those. Now, because he was an atheist, and I'll read his preface, it's actually pretty interesting. Because he was an atheist, he had to formulate a different kind of intelligent design. So Fred Hoyle was the one who's famously said, and I quote him a lot, the probability of of life emerging is it's as unlikely as a tornado passing through a junkyard and assembling a 747. And people say, well, you're forgetting natural selection. I said, that doesn't operate in abiogenesis. So at least at the very least, that's going to be problematic. And then the other thing that has come out is natural selection doesn't work as we think, because it tends to select for loss of complexity, not the construction of it. And that's going to be something interesting. So that's why I kept saying to the creationists, I know you just want to hear it from you want to hear from Kent Hovind and people that are identifying as Christians, and you don't like hearing from non-Christian sources. I said, and Emery and I had this discussion. I said, we're creationists. We go to university to study under non-creationists, people that probably would hate creationists, but they're our teachers because they have information. And by the way, we universally voted Dr. Dan. If we had Dr. Dan, Kent Hovind, or P.Z. Myers, we'd select Dr. Dan to be our teacher.
Oh, man, P.Z. Myers, I quoted him out of a book called Darwin Day in America, and I quoted that. I think I told you that I had this in my dissertation, and my reader, the staff professor made me take it out because P.Z. Myers basically gets militant and says that we need to take baseball bats and brass knuckles to creationists,
steel-toed boots.
And I put in the next paragraph, and I said, as a retired SEAL officer, I bid Dr. Myers good luck with that. He made me take that out.
Oh!
Yeah, he said, yeah, you need to take that out. That's a little too frogman-ish, if we can say that. So, but it was pretty funny. But it's amazing to me also, and Stephen Meyer, as you well know, has been countenanced as a kook, all of ID. But what's interesting is how the ID community keeps pressing this forward, and the resistance to it is so vociferous that it lends itself to what I would almost deem enemy attestation, that there's something there that these guys don't want put out on the docket. And that's why they're resisting so much towards that. I'm trying to find his quote because he put out a tome, geez, where the heck did I put it? Here it is. Stephen Meyer published an article for the Smithsonian, quote, in 2004, I published a peer-reviewed scientific article about the Cambrian explosion and the problem of the origin of biological information needed to explain it. I cited Doug Axe's results and explained why the rarity of functional proteins in sequence space posed such a severe adequacy of Darwinianism mechanisms. The article appeared in a biology journal, the Proceedings of the Biological Society of Washington, published out of the Smithsonian Institution by scientists working for the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History. Because the article also argued that the theory of intelligent design could help explain the origin of biological information, its publication created a firestorm of controversy. Museum scientists and evolutionary biologists from around the country were furious with the journal and its editor, Richard Sternberg, for allowing the article to be peer-reviewed and then published. They took away his keys, his office, and access to specimens. A congressional subcommittee staff later investigated and found that the museum officials initiated an intentional disinformation campaign. Quote, Sternberg has no biology degrees, close quote. Actually, he has 2 PhDs, one in evolutionary biology and one in systems biology, closed. He is a priest, not a scientist, and he was demoted. Close
That's
quote.
Terrible. And he also worked simultaneously with the NIH. So I presume he was actually an NIH employee that was detailed to the Smithsonian. And I tell you, when I was walking the grounds of the NIH, I felt kind of sad because I said I probably met some of his colleagues, and I didn't want to bring the subject up. They probably were my professors that knew him personally. And I was just sad, the whole affair. He's an evolutionary biologist, and he said, I don't agree with Meyer, but I felt it was right to put it on the table because he and his colleagues quietly in the closet talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's
And
the you're not allowed to talk about this in the open because
yeah,
that's unscientific in itself, and that's what I tell these guys. If you're not willing to put the science out on the table and defend it, then you're not a scientist. You're a politician, and you're
yeah,
looking for grant money. And it's interesting. I liken this to, and scientists, especially within that community, wanting to remain very authoritarian, that we cannot, as it wasn't Lenski who said it, but there was one famous evolutionary biologist who said that we can't let God in through the door.
that would be
The
Lewontin.
Lewinton,
Lewontin.
thank you. Yes,
Yeah.
Richard Lewinton. Um, but I wrote in also that if you guys have ever heard 2112, the rock band Rush, they actually talk about this in that ballad. The massive gray
Wow.
walls of the temples rise from the heart of every Federation city. I've always been awed by them, to think that every single facet of every life is regulated and directed from within. Our books, our music, our work and play are all looked after the benevolent wisdom of the priests. We are the priests of the temples of Syrinx. Our great computers fill the hallowed halls. All the gifts of life are held within our walls. Another toy that helped destroy the elder race of man. Forget about your silly whim. It doesn't fit the plan. And that's when, Alex Lifeson talks about going in and finding this guitar that had been nearly fossilized, and he started playing it, but you got to get rid of that because it has no scientific value in it. Well, okay. So there is an authoritarianism that is in that group of scientists, who unfortunately make up the bulk of scientists that have this demeanor that they are the last word and everything. I mean, look at Fauci, for crying out loud. I mean, what a knucklehead that guy is, who goes back on his own science, 20 minutes after he puts it out. So I don't know. It's very disheartening to me that we can't have a free dialogue on this without so much hate and displeasure, I suppose.
Yeah, it's the breakdown of the culture. If I could, I'd like to read the preface of Fred Hoyle.
Yeah, go ahead, brother.
And
I
just
didn't mean to
for
get
the
off on
people that aren't familiar, Fred Hoyle, people have said if he didn't have such a mouth, because he just spoke his mind,
Yeah.
he probably would have won the Nobel Prize in physics, because he was very, very respected astronomer. He's very critical of the Big Bang, and a lot of the things that he's criticized is now starting to come out because year 2020, 2019, 2021, we're starting to see more and more scientists come out and say, we're not really sure about this element of the Big Bang, like dark matter inflation. And some recently were even published in a prestigious astrophysical journal. He used to teach at my school, George Mason, Dr. Cicero Roy, and was questioning the Big Bang altogether. So Hoyle actually was the one who coined the word Big Bang. When they were describing the model, he said, what was it? Some sort of Big Bang. And that it really was a term of derision, but it kind of caught on.
Yeah, because he wasn't a proponent of the Big Bang at the
No,
beginning.
he was
Yeah.
exactly. So I'm just introducing Hoyle, but he has a very fine mathematical mind. And in his book, The Mathematics of Evolution, this is like really painful stuff, even for me. Okay. I was looking through this. I'm like, yeah, that's a physicist for you. Uh,
Yeah, that's like Barrow and Tipler's book. It's filled with advanced calculus, and
oh yeah,
immediately my brain started to fry. So
and now I got this book before I went into my physics program, and it was over my head. And then now that I've had a physics program, it's like, yeah, I'd have to exert. I could sort of understand it after maybe a day or two. Um, and I'm embarrassed to admit that because I've forgotten so much. But anyway, great scientist, and he was just speaking his conscience. Now, if one reads the book, it's like, what's his point? And it's actually muted. We only know about it later as he began to be more willing to articulate what the point he was getting at. So when I read the book, it's like, what are you saying? What really happened? later on, it's apparent what he was laying the foundation of his theory that life was seeded from space. Because the problem, like he said, the tornado in a junkyard was such a big problem for him. He kind of said, well, maybe it could happen in space, and life is all over the universe and it's just falling into the earth, which is, it's, there are problems with that too, but that was his escape because he's an atheist. But the point is, again, this is a hostile witness. He's at least recognizing some problems. God would not be his answer. And so he might appeal, even though, just like a lot of people in his who have his worldview, they recognize the problem, so they'll try to come up with a naturalistic solution, no matter how outrageous, like multiple worlds, for example. His was outer space for the problem of life. And then he laid the foundations for Barrow and Tipler's theory, the omega point theory. And so Barrow and Tipler actually owe some of their ideas to Hoyle. But Tipler, for a while, was an atheist, but then he said, yeah, what I described looks like the Judeo-Christian God. And then he found some more observations in cosmology. He said, yeah, God is immaterial, different substance than what the universe is made of. The philosophers will have their own definition of material and non-material. In the physicist sense, it's just something that is not like what the rest of our matter and energy are made of. What would collapse the wave function? And I'll just read from the preface. And again, Hoyle is an atheist. He writes in his preface, there is a fair flow of Darwinian books on the market. Although some contain valid arguments against the theory, the motives of their authors seem to me to be rarely scientific. The motive is rather to cast doubt on the concept of evolution in order to encourage a return to religious fundamentalism, causing biologists to toss such books on sight into the waste paper basket, causing them perhaps to wonder if it might not be the same with this book. Well, it isn't. Admittedly, I was brought up in the British state school system circa 1925, which was certainly religiously oriented to an extent Americans will hardly credit. In fact, I scored well in religious examinations on account of an early faculty for being able to commit long passages from the Bible to memory. Yes, he's very brilliant. Add to this that I was one of the members of our local church choir. Our church wasn't sufficiently grand to have its own vicar, but the diocese assigned us a curate who would on most Sundays climb the hill from the nearest town to our village. For variety's sake, if not for his own, he would get other curates to stand in for him every 2 or 3 weeks, and sometimes a lay preacher. We boys liked the lay preachers because once they got fairly started, they would mostly foam along with little regard for vocabulary or syntax. One day, a small, thickest man in boots clumped up the wooden steps to the pulpit. After a minute or so taken in settling himself, he suddenly roamed out to our innocent-looking congregation. The number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. It didn't take long for me to work out that 666 was 666, numbers being something with which I regarded myself as being fairly expert. Did this mean that the number of men in the world was claimed to be 666? Or did it mean what it said literally, that 666 was a number attached to a particular man in the fashion of a convict? Either way, I felt little doubt that this particular preacher was seriously daft in his head. When I asked our teacher of religion at school about it, I was told that the text was from the book of Revelation, which perhaps shouldn't be taken too seriously. Maybe not, but for me, it was a wave of an incoming tide licking away at the sand at a sand castle. The sand castle was entirely washed away, all in a moment about 2 years later. This time there would be no doubt about the source or the topic. The source The sources were the sacred Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and the topic was central to the Christian faith, the resurrection. I I had the thought one day to look up and compare what the four Gospels had to say about events of the tomb at the tomb of Christ, explicitly with reference to these questions. Who among Christ's friends, relatives, and disciples first came to the tomb? What was the physical condition of the tomb? And how many angels were present there? To this point, I had been willing to accept such supernatural agents as angels. Indeed, angels seemed to me so remarkable that it mattered quite a lot whether there was one of them, two of them, or three of them in attendance. What I found was that no two among Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John agreed in respect of this simple question of an angel numeration, which even the most slow witted person in my native village would have been able to report correctly. Like a boat pushed off into a fast moving river, I was swept away from my former cherished beliefs, out of my local church in a week, out of my belief in the Christian religion in not much time, out of any belief in any fundamental religion in little more time than that. Since then, the boat has continued on its journey away from any belief in anything which men have written down on paper a long time ago. The criticism of the Darwinian theory given in this book arises straightforwardly from my belief that the theory is wrong, and that contained adherence to it is an impediment to discovering the correct evolutionary theory. To the extent that one is deflected by social religious considerations from correcting what is wrong, one hands victory to opponents. So this was actually a very compelling passage, and I think he highlights something that I'm wrestling with too: reconciliation of the gospel accounts, and that's something that'd be a great topic to talk about. And I'll address a little bit of it here too. But I read that preface. I just like reading people in their own words and in giving as much context as possible without reading their whole book, obviously, to give an idea of Hoyle's character. And yeah, I would disagree with him about obviously the Christianity, but all this to point out that even he could see that there's problems with evolutionary theory. And that's why I said atheist ID is kind of very interesting in and of itself, is where they try to come up with mechanisms that are anything but God, but could at least, in their opinion, serve as a substitute intelligent designer. So that's really all I had to say about mathematics of evolution. And I do have to confess that I think Hoyle had some really good questions. And these are questions that Christians that are interested in evidence and reasons for the Christian faith and apologetics and defending the faith, these are things we have to address. And frankly, that's the first time I even thought about the count of angels. So let me see what else I had to say. He also wrote the book Intelligent Universe, and that's where he mentioned he actually used the phrase intelligent design. This is way before the modern ID movement and like Phil Johnson and Michael Behe and Pandas and People. So if you had some thoughts there, Sandy.
No, it's interesting that when you were reading that, I'm reminded of Stephen Meyer's reputation of theistic evolution and the biologos crowd that takes scripture rather in a syncretic fashion to try to make their arguments, but he deals with the science and basically shows how the gene regulatory cells and things do not line up with the theistic evolution science. But it's interesting that there are so many atheists who can give attestation to the intelligent design point of view and add credence to it, which in and of itself is heartening, because they are at least questioning the science themselves. And Hoyle is at least is an honest broker in scientifically. Theologically, obviously he's off, but at least he is being an honest broker in all of his writings and his research.
Yeah. So Nephilim Free says there's no contradiction between the accounts of the women visiting the tomb. One reported one, the other reported two. If one of them only saw one of the two going to the tomb, there is no contradiction. So thank you for that. And Nephilim Free, this is, and I sent him an email earlier, and I'm just pointing this out to the viewers of the show. I've adopted kind of a policy, partly for just my own sanity, to have only one co-host at a time. Because sometimes when we have too many people, we get off topic. It is really easy to get off topic, even with just one person. And it's just easier for me. Plus, I just love to talk, so I can dominate the conversation on my own channel. I'm not really trying to be fair at all. And but I make this offer: if you'd like to come on my channel and talk to the viewers, we can work something out. And I'm going to have a variety of guests. Dr. Dan and I are trying to work out something to talk about his specialty. So I just wanted, a lot of people like these open mics, and I understand that. So with that in mind, I talked to Graham Gould and I said, hey, can I just refer them to your channel because you host so many open mics? He said, that'd be great. So I just wanted to say, a lot of people may be expecting that I'll open the mic up, and that may be the convention of a lot of channels, and that's how they get traffic. It just doesn't work for me personally, and like I said, I like to talk, and so that's part of the reason. So don't take this that I'm trying to explain that I'm going to try to be fair to everyone. I'm not, because it's my channel. But I appreciate that, and I wanted to point out one other thing, and this is just a subtlety. There was a case, and I was thinking about this today, and let me highlight Nephilim's comment. In the case of Elisha, there was that time the Syrians surrounded the city, and his servant said, "Look at all those soldiers there," and Elisha said, "Lord, open his eyes." So Elisha already saw, and when the Lord opened his servant's spiritual eyes, and he could see all the angels. So there was Elisha saw all these angels, and all the other people did. So that's going from 0 to a whole ton. So it's entirely possible that I like Nephilim's resolution to the issue better than what I just said. But I said, it's possible someone would just see one angel and the other one could see two, because we have a precedence in the Bible. But that seems more reasonable. So yes, I want to say there's my specialty has been in creationism, and so this is a chance for me to learn, because I've been specialized so much in creationism the last 7 years, because that's my professional work. And so we have the next thing on the docket here. Maybe we'll go through it in quick order, and we can always review it some more. I mentioned Tim McGrew, and as I said, I'm just trying to work through some of the copyright issues. If I can verify that I can share large clips of it, we can have a show on Dr. McGrew's work, because I would like to advertise his work. It's very good on the chain of custody for like the first and second centuries of the gospel accounts, and their commitment to writing, committing to writing. So now the dress. Let me show. I found this just interesting, because there is a passage in the gospel where it mentions, one person says that the robe was scarlet, another one says that it's red. Not to mention that they're very similar colors, red and scarlet. But I was Googling this. I said, I have no way. I said, you know what? There was. Let me just read this account, and I'll show it in the chat here. It's called The Dress. And I was like, what are the chances that I'm going to just put this as a Google search term and I'm going to find a Wikipedia entry on it? And I said, I'll type The Dress. And guess what? This is what came up. And it was exactly what I had in mind. This dress, it looks to me, and this went viral, and it actually resulted in several peer-reviewed papers on the phenomenon. When I looked at it, I said the color's white and gold, and it turned out the dress is confirmed. I mean, this was led to a long discussion because some people said it's black and blue, and I'm like, no, it's white and gold. And so, let me just see. I'll just read the wiki article. The dress is a photograph that became a viral internet sensation on February 26, 2015, when the viewers disagreed over whether the dress pictured was colored black and blue or white and gold. I see it as white and gold. The phenomenon revealed differences in human color perception, which have been the subject of ongoing scientific investigations into neuroscience and vision science, producing a number of papers published in peer-reviewed science journals. Just out of curiosity, uh, what colors do you guys think it was? I saw white and gold. I'll show it again. Protract. He said, "I think I said it was black and gold." Nicholas, it's blue and black. And he said, I get the gold, but I don't see the whole white thing. Conrad said, I see light purple and pink. Patrick is light brown and white. Oh my goodness, this is cool. So there's this gospel passage that says someone said it was scarlet, the robe of Christ, and the other said it was red. So this resolves something interesting, and it just talks about human perception. Now, this does raise the issue of what we call objective reality. It's oh goodness, it's impossible for me to see anything other than black and blue. Guys, I got to tell you, it looks white and gold to me, but it's been confirmed by the dressmaker it was blue and black. This does have something to do with how it was photographed and in the sunlight, etc. But it's just at the edge that we're getting all these different comments. Yeah, do you have anything, Sandy?
I'm looking at it, and from the sheen on her elbow, if that is an elbow, it looks to be. If I'm looking at it just from the picture itself without taking into consideration any shadings or anything, it looks to me like white and gold. But because of it looks to be blue and gold. But if you look up at her arm, it looks like the shading from some kind of shadow makes it appear to be blue and gold. Whereas I would say, well, given that piece of evidence that it's white and gold, but he said it's black and blue.
Yeah, the way what they did is then they showed the dress in a different context, and even I would say, yeah, it's black and blue. So they had a different photograph, but apparently that photograph was just at the edge of people's color perception that it caused that.
Wow.
And one scientist said, I've been studying this topic of perception, visual perception for 30 years. He said, this has to be about the best example. So it may not actually be specifically the dress, but it might be it's a combination of just the way it translated into photography. So, So another one, I think I saw it as white and gold when you first scrolled to it, and then it went black and blue a few seconds later. So this kind of goes, this would be an interesting thing about, what's objective reality. And from a physicist standpoint, if we had cameras looking at this, it would be able to tally, the exact frequency of the light emitted. That is objective. We would measure the wavelength, but humans will process those particular wavelengths differently, and it'll register in the way that their color tables set up. And we do have the phenomenon of color blindness, and we also know, like deer, um, these hunters will wear this orange, and just like, that's not really good camouflage. And they said, no, don't worry about it. The deers don't see the orange; they perceive color differently. So, in terms of objective reality, there are instruments that can actually measure things objectively, but there is a subjective, there is a perception that is, somewhat unique to each individual. And they've also done tests between males and females. Females are very sensitive to color. They can detect shades of color that.
I got a funny story about that.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
So I'm in my last billet, which was at Naval Sea Systems Command, and I was the SEAL liaison for this is back in 2004 to 2006, and we're building the Virginia class submarine. And there were certain things about it. I had to make sure that the guys could lock out of it properly, and I had to do all the human interface. Well, I was the only male in the room, with the exception of the two program managers, and all the rest were female architects and mathematicians, etc. And I came in dressed one day because I was taking classes over at the Joint Military Intelligence College, and I came in dressed in a coat and tie one day. And one of the ladies remarked, oh, that's a wonderful mauve tie you have on. And I said, mauve, what the heck is that? Well, so the ladies then took it upon themselves to start teaching me colors. And it grew into this joke around the floor where we were all sitting that, Sandy needs to learn about colors. So at my going away party, they gave me that giant Crayola crayon box that has all those different colors in it. It's like 180 different Crayola crayons with all the different colors in them. And so, yeah, I think the at least anecdotal evidence that women do see colors in a much different way than we do holds some sway.
Oh yeah, and it is been scientifically confirmed, because they had these all these control groups, and I kind of knew it even like with we were repainting one of our rooms, and I said, Mom, we have to pick the right shade here, and I said, all of these shades of white looked almost identical, and I said, I said, you know what, I'm going to just try to see how good her perception was, and I said, I think this is the one that is closest, and I'll see if she can repick it out of a batch of 40, and they're all white. Everyone who looked at the color would say white, but they're all slightly different shades. She could pick that one out of 40. It was incredible. Just no hesitation. I actually had to look very carefully. I think this is just interesting. I didn't realize, sometimes you think the people are just kidding you when they're saying they're seeing it as blue and black. I'm just like, no, you're messing with me.
Yeah.
So this is why this particular photo just became viral. Now, I did see photos of that dress, and it was very clear it was blue and black in another photo. So there's something about this particular photo and the angle and the lighting that just made it behave that way. Even on our computer screens, people would disagree. So I found that very interesting. So that kind of, resolves one biblical difficulty about the colors. When someone said it's red and another said it's scarlet, I think that's actually a credit to, that would actually support the biblical account because we know now that people will perceive colors differently. That's perfectly reasonable. And, whatever language that they use to describe things, I can understand that too. So, um, so that was just kind of more to lighten things up. Um, and like I said, uh, I said it resolves Hoyle's paradox in that we can perceive the same event differently, just kind of in general, or even the same objects differently. We can describe it. And so when we're talking about one or two angels, I think Nephilim Free gave a, a good a good explanation for how we could get different counts of angels. So again, as I said, God does sometimes make it difficult for us just to test us to see if we really want it. We're going to tend to trust, and even when we are encountered with difficulties, even in reading the Bible, and there have been. But then I found the trend is always, at least in my lifetime, has always been that it tends to go in favor of the Bible. Some archaeological discovery will come up that will reinforce something that we might have been having problems with. And it's been happening even in the last 2 centuries. So that's why archaeology is great. And then science and creationism. So now the next thing I'll share is just briefly on genetic entropy and my views. And someone was kidding me yesterday that I typed the word GE in the title twice. And I said, okay, I have to make something about General Electric. And I'll cover genetic entropy first. And thanks, guys, for the feedback on the color of the dress. That was amazing. So let me cite this about genetic entropy. And as I said, creationists, I know you revere John Sanford. I revere him too. But the way to honor his work is to make forceful arguments to the public. Because he's known as a creationist, we're at a disadvantage when we're trying to reach out. Even Christians would probably like to hear what the other side has had to say, because if the other side says there's genetic entropy, you don't even need to cite a creationist source. And if one reads the book Genetic Entropy by Dr. Sanford, he quotes evolutionary biologists, and he said that when he was still a non-Christian, going through his PhD program, he said there's one thing that a professor said. One of the problems with evolutionary theory is this thing called mutational load, meaning that certain species cannot tolerate too many mutations, too many bad things, too many copy errors in their genome. If it's too high a rate, the species will go extinct, and that's an outstanding problem in evolutionary biology. Once Dr. Sanford became a Christian, he began considering that, and he said, yeah, the professor was right. This lends credence to the idea that humanity is young. And so let me just show some things here, and I'll quote secular sources. First thing, by the way, so first there was a movie called Idiocracy. Here's the IMDb, which is, I think, Internet Movie Database or something. Synopsis. Private Joe Bowers, the definition of average American, is selected by the Pentagon to be the guinea pig for a top-secret hibernation program. Forgotten, he awakens 5 centuries into the future. He discovers a society so incredibly dumbed down that he's easily the most intelligent person alive. Okay, so that's just the story. And so, but just with that story in mind, Michael Lynch cited this paper favorably about steady IQ decline. So Michael Lynch is like one of the most respected evolutionary biologists and geneticists. He writes on population genetics and quantitative genetics. And he cites this person, the abstract. 2 dysgenic models of declining intelligence have been proposed. The first posits that since the Industrial Revolution, those with low G, that is like IQ, those with low IQ, low G, have a reproductive advantage over those with high G. Let me translate this. Those with low IQs make more babies than those who are smart. Okay? The second posits that relaxing purifying selection against deleterious mutations in modern populations has led to G, IQ declining due to mutation accumulation. Here, a meta-analytic estimate of the decline due to selection is computed across 9 US and UK studies, revealing a loss of 0.39 points per decade. Okay, so the IQs are declining. And there's physical evidence for that because our cranial capacities, the anthropologists tell us that our brain size has shrunk over time. But now Lynch said this: mutation and human exceptionalism, our future genetic load. Thus, without any compelling counter-argument at this time, it remains difficult to escape the conclusion that numerous physical and psychological attributes are likely to slowly deteriorate in technologically advanced societies. The incidences of a variety of afflictions, including autism, male infertility, asthma, immune system disorders, diabetes, already exhibit increases exceeding the expected rate. The observational work may substantially underestimate the mutational vulnerability of the world's most complex organ, the human brain. Because human brain function is governed by the expression of thousands of genes, the germline mutation rate to psychological disorders may be unusually high. At least 30% of individuals with autism spectrum disorders appear to acquire such behaviors by de novo mutation. It has been suggested that there has been a slow decline in intelligence in the United States and United Kingdom over the past century. And I know that sounds really depressing, but the Lord had told us this. And that corresponds to that decaying curve that Sandy was talking about. And I said, another biologist, a geneticist, Brian Sykes, independently came up with that decaying exponential curve. So,
well, let me ask you something,
yeah.
Sal. Don't the gene regulatory centers help to mitigate mutation accumulation? I mean, will it not then subsequently lead to a complete decline in the species? Because because the gene regulatory centers, as I understand them, maybe I'm completely off on this. That's why I'm asking this interrogatively. But Stephen Myers was talking about the gene regulatory centers that because of mutation accumulation will not allow that mutation within those cells to live, and that's subsequently why you'll see the six-winged fruit fly will die. It won't live.
Let me just maybe frame the argument a little differently. I'll give it a very simplistic thing, and it's actually accurate. There are many ways if you have a complex system, any machine that's complex, there are many more ways to break the parts than to make them. If we just randomly change stuff, so easy to break it, very easy, very difficult to make any sort of improvement. Like if you went out to a car and tried to, like, say, randomly change the spark plug, that's not going to work because you have to change all the corresponding stuff. So that's the way I try to describe mutation. Just think of any complex machine and say you're just going to change the shape of things. When we alter proteins, we alter their shape. And just like machines, if you mutate, this is where I'm trying to say, I try to tell my ID colleagues, don't get into all this theoretical abstractions of protein mutation rates and deleterious. Just go back to our understanding of mechanical systems. Everything has to fit really well in a machine. That's very true also of the machines in the cell. When there's a mutation change, you change the geometry of the parts. And it's more complex than that, but it's close enough to the truth that if you're making this discussion before biologists, they'll understand it. You see that
that's
with
that's the kind of philosophical extraction that is needed when we're talking with people, because again, we go down into the weeds. That's an excellent explanation right there. I mean, it's simple and straightforward.
But by the way, I'm working with Dr. Sanford on a paper just like that for educational purposes. And I said, Doc, I don't call him Doc. He insists I call him John. Behind his back, Mom and I called him Dr. Sanford. he he's a very humble man. He doesn't, he feels uncomfortable with all the titles being described. Just super guy.
Yeah.
And I said, we don't have to cite Doug Axe or any of these studies on. I said we just use common sense. When you mutate the gene that expresses the protein, there's a likelihood you're going to alter its physical characteristics, its shape, its size, its shape. And just like you can see it like with the bacterial flagellum or ATP synthase, if you mutate the parts, those little generators and motors just aren't going to fit together anymore. And this holds true in terms of the geometry. But then, an aficionado will say, "Oh, what about all the binding sites and electrochemical interactions?" I said, "You only make the problem worse because you have to have it not only the right shape and size, it has to have the right charges, plus and negative in all these parts and exposure to chemical." I said, if you include that, you make the improbability even worse. So I know I didn't answer your question directly about gene regulation. I think I gave you a better
excellent.
one.
Yeah. So so in my non-biological brain here, one could extrapolate from, or extract from that the machinery just doesn't fit. It'd be like, trying to put a Volvo transmission onto a Cummins diesel engine without the proper computer codes talking to each other, and that it's not going to work. So I know that's a knuckle dragger analogy, but one
it's
which
very good.
Yeah.
I'm trying to tell my ID colleagues, stop with all the theoretical stuff, just appeal to geometry. And that's the reason we're trying to write this paper. We might get rejected, but it's like, okay, we told the truth. We did our job. And, if secular editors won't accept what we have to say, we'll just publish it elsewhere. And no one has challenged me on it. And I'm like, why should they? This is like almost textbook biology, because I think even in my biochemistry textbook, they said the function of proteins is critically dependent on its size and shape. And I'm like, yeah, well, duh. You could just see that in ATP synthase or anything that looks like mechanical, just like in man-made machines.
Yeah,
so
I think Godzilla Freak brings a great point up here in the chat. Thanks for posting that, brother. He says, "I love the point of structural biology in regards to genetic entropy. Most mutations we think of are macro changes, but most mutations actually have micro level effects." Absolutely. One of the things we hear from atheists that that have read some literature and are not nearly as well read as as Sal or Dr. Sanford or anybody, but they say that those small changes affect a macroevolutionary change, and we've argued that just doesn't hold water because number one, the machinery, as Sal just said, would break down, and I like to subscribe to my diesel transmission theory. So
it's a good one. It's a good one.
But it's the same with any kind of diving systems. I can go in there and compatibility of diving components, compatibility within the bounds of any other mechanical systems on a macro level. Those small changes cannot affect a change of species, and that's one of the things then that you can then relate to transitions in the fossil record. And I had an atheist the other night said, "Well, the whole fossil record is transition." I said, "No, it isn't. Where is a transitional fossil in the fossil record? We have none." And somebody brought up Archaeopteryx or Archaeopteryx, thank you. But then we found out that those actually lived with dinosaurs. So the preponderance of evidence of transitional forms, i.e. one species popping out of another because of the accumulation of micro mutations to affect a whole macro change, just doesn't it's one that doesn't have any scientific basis in it, and it's a great point that he brought up. Godzilla Freak brought up, because, man, I hear that all the time from people. So that's one thing that focusing on, fish are still fish, Darwin's finches are still finches, and that gets back into the whole phenotypic plasticity argument that even Gerd Muller in 2016 said doesn't hold water anymore. And that's why the whole evolutionary biology community is in kind of a panic mode right now when we put all that out. So
Now, I just want to address briefly some questions on IQ, and then I'll get to the transitionals. I'm glad we're having this conversation, Sandy, because sometimes the RD proponents, and God bless them, they're well intentioned. We have to go through some iterations to improve our arguments, and I feel the geometry one that I just gave you is the easiest.
Yeah, I don't know. The arguments are great, and we need to have those kinds of very sophisticated arguments, but we also have to bring it to a level of people who do not have that. And I don't mean sophistication in a pejorative sense. I mean, they've never studied biology, or they've never studied, those kinds of things. So the what do I want to say? The axioms that we need to be able to proffer to them have got to be something that would fit their own context. And I think taking that kind of a thing and using it in a sense that they can understand, diesel mechanics, diving system, whatever their context is, so that we can make the relationship that it's just too hard, and you put that into a very compact, simple thing for someone to understand. Mechanistically, and most people understand mechanics and electronics because of the context that we live in, but also their personal contexts. Those are the kinds of arguments that we have to be able to levy to them in a, again, I don't want to use the word simplistic because it holds a kind of a pejorative, an acceptable or a relational type of argument to them.
Yeah, I actually worked on this. Was like 2 years of my work, because it may sound funny. I really wasn't sure that this geometry argument would hold. But when I had the chance to work with protein biologists, they said, yeah, that's so accurate. Because some of these, the precision is at the atomic level, like even half the size of an atom. It has to be shaped to precision. We can't even achieve that in machine shops, where we have to make something so precise. If it's half an atom too big or too small, it fails. Specifically, the people who are familiar with the potassium ion channel, that's the case. I mean, that protein system has to create a hole that if it's half an atom too small or too large, it fails. I said, you can't achieve any, we can't, our machine shops cannot achieve that sort of precision. And I said, if you change the sequence, it's going to change the size and shape. It's just inevitable. There's no way, the only way that it'll change is for the worst. At best, you just hope it's a neutral change. It's just like taking a screw, a nut, and a bolt and trying to file one thing down. You're not going to improve it. Or you try to add a little more metal, it's going to jam. And so much of biology is there are parts that are flexible. Okay, I'll grant that. So I don't want the EVOs to say, I can cite this thing that's pretty flexible. Yeah, but how about all the things that are not flexible, like the potassium ion channel? You're going to have a hard time. And so I'm really glad you like this, and I just want, maybe you can use that in your discussion.
You just made another great point about flexibility. Within the cell or within the genome is flexible to accommodate environmental pressures, foodstuffs, water, whatever the case may be. That's why Darwin's finches, their beaks got bigger, then they got smaller, but they're still finches. And, simplistically, then you can show that you need new information inputted to make anything a different kind of machine.
Yeah. So we have a little bit of a backlog. People are asking about the IQ, and Conrad asked, "What about nature and nurture and IQs?" There is. It's just like um, if you could take two identical twins, and if one is exercised physically, one will just develop more muscles and be more physically stronger. So there is nurture to IQ. Um, and the question was, is the decrease in IQ due to mutations or um, oh, I missed this. I can't. I'm sorry. There was a question about. See if I can retrieve the message. I can't scroll in my system here to highlight comments. There was a question whether it's because of childlessness or is it mutation. It's actually both. So there was a study done that said really smart girls have a tendency not to have any kids at all. So the less intelligent women don't will have more kids, and that they have cited this specifically as an example of natural selection reducing IQ.
Hmm.
That's from the evolutionary biologists themselves. And Michael Behe has tried to point out we have tended to think natural selection selects for increase of complexity. And I said, and he's shown so many examples. He said there may be cases where we'll argue mutation and selection increases the complexity, but the general trend has been towards simplicity. And that's one example there. But how much of this is also mutational? And there have been studies on this, and I just kind of listed it there, where the autism spectrum, and then mental disorders. Um, and I could tell there's one thing that like premature aging, genetic diseases, and it's like, how's this going to stop? Because if natural selection worked the way Darwin thought, we would have eliminated like childhood diabetes by now, or all these other kind of maladies, like say nearsightedness before reaching the age of bearing children. There's just all these things, and it's not getting cleaned out. It's persisting, and it persists in mammals like dogs. And I'm like, yeah, so it's not like it's ever really been cleaned out, and it's had millions of years. So if supposedly humans had evolved from creatures that are mammalian, kind of related to dogs, why hasn't natural selection cleaned it out by now? And there are all these outstanding questions. So um, and if people wonder why I don't talk much about genetic entropy, I said, well, there's data on it. You can look if you really, what I tried to say, creationists, I know you love Dr. Sanford, and God bless you for loving us creationists. Just look at some of the literature, and I provided some of it right here. Oh, and by the way, I was the one who provided Dr. Sanford these latest quotes. This is long after he wrote his book, and he's like, wow, I didn't know Michael Lynch wrote that. And I said, yeah, isn't that cool? And he said, yeah, Michael Lynch and we've lived parallel lives. We've been arriving at the same conclusions, even though he's not a creationist. And so just a little, some self-promotion here. That's why I've been rated the #1 YouTube creationist by Panel of
Yay!
Evolutionists, because I dig stuff up like that, and I pass it on to the top thinkers in creationist theory. Now, I've been criticized by some of my fellow young Earth creationists as not being up on the literature, and I just got to deny that. I help write the literature, and someone said I haven't read the latest YEC literature in the last 10 years. That's false. I just may not totally endorse everything that's out there. That's all there is. Now, I wanted to I wanted to bring up something that Sandy, you said, and we'll talk about macroevolution also. Let me just show you something humorous. I showed this yesterday. Did you see me talk about this yesterday, Sandy?
Oh, no.
Okay, we supposedly evolved from fish. Now, you see the position of the head here and the heart? The mouth and the heart and the stomach. Do you see where the position of the anus is? And then this urogenital opening, which is corresponding to the vagina. Now, if you took a, a human female and you looked at the layout of the private parts, do you see that it's reversed in the fish?
Yeah, that's interesting.
So I'm not going to make a big deal about this. I wouldn't necessarily say that this is strong evidence against evolution, but it is another problem they have to deal with.
Well, it's
If
interesting
we,
you bring that up because uh, Jeff Durbin, who is he's got that YouTube channel Apologia Studios. He's a presuppositional apologist. Always uses the axiom that did philosophers come from fish? Did we all just come from fish? So this is an interesting twist on that, to say the least. And Jeffson, he's awesome.
was he the one in the Looney Tunes debate?
I don't know. He is
There
he's
was
out in
there was the
Arizona.
one
He is
there was the
the
guy that was in the debate with the prosthetic
Oh,
engineer.
yeah. No, yeah, that's him. That's him. Yeah, the
Okay,
Looney Tune debate. Yeah, right. Yeah,
that
the
was a
guy
great
who.
debate. Thanks for. We'll have to, if I can get the copyrights released, we'll have to review the Looney Tunes debate.
Oh
I
my
actually
gosh.
thought Mr. Looney Tunes was.
Yeah, and
He
that
brought up
guy
some good
is
points.
he is the foremost. The guy who just went off. He is the foremost expert on prosthetics in the world, and he just made himself out to be a stark raving lunatic. You
Yeah,
know, and just so angry and it was interesting. The guy who he was partnered with was a Latter Day Saints guy, former Latter Day Saints guy, and an atheist. I think he's a biologist or atheist. I think he teaches physics, but yeah, that was incredible. But he kept going back to, you believe we came from fish, and the guy kept saying, yeah, we came from fish. So so it's,
okay. There's one evolutionary transition they have to account for, and I tried to point out. I said, okay, all right, guys, creationists, this is lighthearted. Okay, don't make a big argument about this at this stage. I think sometime in the future, as we get more genetic and developmental data, this could become a stronger argument. All right, so I'm not saying it's a bad argument. I'm just saying it's not a great argument yet. Some of the stuff I've talked about with genetic entropy and protein structural biology, all that, I think those are better arguments in abiogenesis. But we're slowly working up the ladder. The next one would be eukaryotic evolution, butterfly evolution. But then we look at this. And I just need to point out something to these guys that say, what about Evo Devo? Where one change in the Hox gene can move the legs and we can grow all these things. Okay, just think about this. In sexually reproducing species, and I want to be respectful of, there are individuals, humans that have birth defects, but I got to address this because it's science. When these Evo Devo biologists, evolutionary developmental biologists, are arguing, hey, we just changed the Hox gene cluster, we can have macroevolution. I said, okay, there's a problem here. Maybe you need to think about it. There are two levels. One, let's say that change happens in a male, and now his leg, or a female, and now his leg is sticking out at the middle of his chest. Is he going to attract mates? All right. And again, I want to be sensitive to people with birth defects. But this is just the way it works. So let's say that this fish had to evolve kind of the reverse architecture that we find in humans, where the vaginal or genital parts are in the front and the anus is in the back, versus the way it is here. Okay, it's reversed in the fish. So Miss Female Fish comes along and she has her private parts reversed. And then a male fish sees it, swims up. He thinks it's his dream girl from far away, gets real close and realizes, something's wrong. And he tells the young lady, it's not you, it's me. And then he swims away. Okay. There is a problem if we're invoking macroevolution in big stages like that, where it would alter kind of the male female dynamics. And it's just like, guys, evolutionary biologists, don't you even think about stuff like that? Of course, someone was sharp and say, sometimes the way that the males will fertilize will be just on the eggs. They won't even interact with the females. So I'll grant that. But I just want to throw that out there that, you know, if they thought about this systematically and carefully, they'll see that this is a lot more subtle than they're making it out to be. So um, I'm glad we had a chance to talk about macroevolution. That's now what I do say is I do say there are transitionals in the conceptual sense, in that, um, and so I just want to caution here, Sandy, that when I talk to them, I'll say, let's assume for the sake of argument there is common descent. So I will say that, yeah, between a yeast and a human, there are mammals. So we could say that there are some creatures a little closer to us than the bacteria, and you can kind of line creatures up in terms of a sequence. And this has been known for a long time, and I see it in my gene sequencing. So we could say transitional in the conceptual sense, but in the physical sense, there are problems morphologically, but I really see it in the level of new proteins. So there are proteins that mammals and vertebrates have that other species don't. And I said, where did those come from? They're orphan, and those are the real problems that can emerge by small steps. And Dr. Dan and I had an interesting conversation. I said, do you think all proteins descended from the same, have a single gene common ancestor? He said, no, I don't see it even in his work. And I asked his colleagues, they agreed. So I said, you're saying proteins don't share a common ancestry? I said, that's a win for the idea that we have these separate created kinds. They will disagree with that. So I don't, they'll disagree with me going, they'll go with me up to a point, but they won't say created kinds. So please don't accuse me of misquoting. But they did agree with me have these separate architectures. And so that's just a little bit of a just a pointer there, Sandy. I personally don't argue that there are no transitionals. I will say, let's just assume for the sake that there, for the sake of argument, that there's still a lot of missing pieces, and that's where the argument will be stronger.
Well, the missing pieces that's really the point.
Yeah.
And I just sent you a compilation of what Gerd Mueller had said at the 2016 Royal Society, and basically something else. This basically rocked the world of evolutionary biology, but origin of phenotypic complexity, origin of anatomical novelty, origin of non-gradual modes of transition, abrupt fossil appearances with no transitional forms. So when you have the leading evolutionary biologists in the world saying that, it's pretty amazing. Let me see if I can get the rest of it in here. I don't know why the chat's not letting me. Here's number.
They limit to 200 characters.
Yeah. So let me put in the rest of this. Number 5. No need
like
for
Twitter.
changed DNA. Yeah. No need for non-genetic factors of change. DNA and mutation does not explain speciation, biases in generation of variation. So even the leading evolutionary biologist in the world, in 2016, so it's a fairly recent paper, said, hey guys, we got a problem here, because things just don't stack up with Darwinistic theories.
Yeah, and that's very powerful. Thank you for that. I actually didn't realize they were saying the lack of non-gradual modes of transition. I can quote, thank you. You taught me some biology today.
Well, it's not me. This is the leading. Let me see if I can send you the paper. The paper is entitled "Explanatory Deficits of Modern Synthesis," and he wrote a book in 2003. I'll send it to you. But I mean, this guy is a heavy hitter. If one can subscribe to that notion. Origin of Organismal Form, Gerd Mueller and Stuart Newman in the MIT Press. So it was.
Oh yeah.
But when Mueller put that out in 2016 at the Royal Society, that man, it rocked everybody. And Stephen Meyer is quoted. That's where actually I got it from, was one of Stephen Meyer's YouTube lectures. It was really good.
Oh, and for everyone's benefit, we talked earlier about that big congressional investigation defending Richard Sternberg, that he was wronged, but then it was out of their jurisdiction. And Sternberg had published Meyer's paper. Meyer quoted heavily from Mueller and Newman.
Yeah.
Oh, Mr. Jetty, you're here. I wanted to thank you. We were talking about the link you sent me to Tim McGrew, and I was just saying if I can work out the copyright issues, we'll try to have a discussion on it on this channel sometime. I really wanted to thank you for that. So I didn't forget. I just had to figure a way to work some of this stuff into my show. So, Mr. Jetty, I acknowledged you in the video description. If you see it, where I mentioned Tim McGrew. So thank you for connecting me with that. So it's really great to see you.
Hey, Sal, I got to sign off. It's almost 1 o'clock here, so.
All right, take care. You got to go to church. Yeah, I go to a local church here now. It's just walking distance, but.
It's not too far to Leesburg now. It's only about 20 minutes. But everybody pray for Cornerstone Chapel and Tanner Cross and this fight that's been taken on in the Loudoun County School District, because this has national attention, and people are coming out of the woodwork to basically topple this, because this is a center of gravity, and everybody's looking at this as a political center of gravity, whether this kind of nonsense is going to be foisted upon students. And so a lot of prayers are needed for people to weather the storm, shall we say. So.
Yes. And Sam, I'd like to a big hearty thanks on behalf of the audience here. We're always
my pleasure, brother.
I loved your story about Charlie Sheen and the movie, and you got to be in the movie Navy SEALs.
Oh my gosh! I tell you what, that was hilarious. What an opportunity just to see how Hollywood works. My goodness. Charlie Sheen.
Lord willing, we'll be in touch. We'll do some more shows, and then we'll do ministry in the DC area. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah,
maybe in the fall when things are not quite so hot here in the summers, we can visit campuses.
Shoot me an email. Let me know. Pardon me, when you want to do another archaeological lecture, because I've got some new material that just came in. So a lot of pictures, and seeing's believing. So and you can't fight stones.
All righty. Take care, Sandy. And I'm just going to continue on for the rest of the audience. I have a few more things, so please turn in, and so you and Mrs. Pidgeon can go off to church and well rested.
Yeah. Shalom, all you guys.
Take care.
And shalom, guys. And God bless, and keep spreading the word.
Amen. God bless.
Amen. God bless.
All right, everyone. I just have one more thing on the docket. I was going to talk about my research areas. And this will probably be just 10 minutes, just to kind of just let people know what I'm working on. I'm actually working on 2 or 3 peer-reviewed papers we're trying to get published. And a couple of them, one of them is a follow-on to the one that I'd mentioned earlier on this channel, where we are in the FASIB journal, which is more, and that wasn't really even that was definitely not a research article. It was just an announcement of our poster session, but we had to get approval to be in that poster session, just to know that we're not cranks, and that our abstract had to go through an approval process, that we're not throwing out junk science there. And it's also a chance for people in the societies of experimental biology to get to know about the lab that this came out of. And I had the privilege of being one of the people working with the team there at the lab at Lipscomb University. It's centered in Lipscomb University, but there are individuals from all over North America that were involved in this. We had funds from secular sources and from the Discovery Institute and from the Creation Research Society, and me from the FMS Foundation. Really trying to, we're trying to actually move medical research forward. And the reason the grants came there was there were a lot of student researchers there. And we felt these organizations wanted to support people matriculating through college. So even though the paper doesn't mention one lick of ID or mention any criticism of evolutionary theory, it was just good science. And so it was a great project to work on, to say, hey, we're not all about just pushing creationism. We want to move medical research and science on the whole forward. And it really was a chance to prove to the world that, creationists should be welcomed if they can do good science, like Emery Moyna, who's in grad school. We should be valued, which they're trying to devalue us collectively in this culture. So that was a victory for us. So I mentioned, and this connects to something, I mentioned it to really cutting edge ID, which I call steganography, where the differences, why did God make chimpanzees, especially they're so similar to us? And that's kind of been the thorn in the side of creationists. It's like, this does look like you have a sequence going from simple to complex and going from primitive organisms. And you can kind of build kind of stairways, kind of a stair step of you go from a bacteria to your single-celled eukaryotes, and single-celled eukaryotes to simple multicellular worm or fish. And that fish can, it's a mammal is a little bit closer to a human. So you kind of go on this stairway going closer from like a bacteria to creatures that are more and more similar to humans. You can do that. That looks like an evolutionary transition. And I'm just like, Lord, I got to admit, the evolutionists have a point there. That even though we can identify that there are difficulties in the transition, and I've been, I'd like to think I've been a proponent of highlighting some of those difficulties, but it's like, well, Lord, it does look like a stairway. And then I began to say, maybe this is not a stairway in the physical sense of evolution from a universal common ancestor. It's evolution in the conceptual sense. So what is the purpose of this? And I realized, I began to ponder, and also in light of Dembski's work. By the way, he invited me to be his graduate student in 2007 at Baylor. They ended up, the evolutionists shut down that lab, and it made it a moot point. I wasn't going to graduate from Baylor. I ended up going to Johns Hopkins instead to study physics. I was going to study evolution informatics there, because they had the evolution informatics lab, and I believe that lab still exists. So I've been mildly critical of some of Bill Dembski's work, but his stuff on steganography was great. The idea that biology has all these hidden messages that we need to decode that'll help us do scientific investigation. And I began to look, even outside of Dembski's advanced theory, there's a lot of biology that we learn about human biology that we learn by studying other creatures. Like we learn about the human nervous system by studying squid. Some of the biggest advancement in understanding the human nervous system was studying squid. Some of the biggest advancements that led to the ENCODE project in its study of the epigenome, and then also the Roadmap Epigenomics project, which is a follow-on to ENCODE. A lot of that began with studying yeast. So they're pieces of human biology that are just spread all across all these other creatures. And those creatures are nicely optimized for dissection and study and investigation. Some of the reasons are they reproduce very fast. Some of the reasons are some of them have kind of like invisible bodies, like the zebrafish, or they have certain body parts that are exaggerated, like the giant squid axon, which is a nerve, part of a nerve. And that makes it easy to insert metal probes to measure voltage levels, and that's how come it's an ideal way to study human nerves. So it seems people have we use the word model organisms, but it seems they're pieces of the puzzle of human biology that can be studied independent of studying humans. And this came to the forefront of my mind when I was studying neuroscience at the NIH as a student, not as a researcher. And I was assigned a project to give a class presentation on how a certain structure of a neural receptor was resolved to be tetrameric. It was an experiment by Rosamund. And a graduate student was assigned to help me understand the experiment. And I asked him, how did tell me about these cells that we studied. He said, oh, they're embryonic stem cells. And I didn't want to go any further. He said, yeah, they're immortalized embryonic stem cells. And I just wanted to be professional and just talk about the science. And I didn't want to raise the issue, where did those embryonic stem cells come from? I went home and I just about wept. I found out that the specific cell line, embryonic stem cell line that was used in the experiment I had to describe, was from an aborted fetus. The body parts of that fetus, the embryonic stem cells, are available in kits. They've regrown parts of his body or her body. And they sell it on the internet, starting at $200. And I was just like, this. I know that sounds cold and horrible. And it's like, well, it is. And that's why I'm mentioning it, because I realized then at that point how grateful we ought to be that we don't have to volunteer human beings for live dissection so that we could understand our own biology. God has provided us creatures like chimpanzees that are similar enough to us that we can use them to study our own biology. The irony is, it's perfectly acceptable to use human body parts of aborted fetuses, and they sell them to medical companies and research companies. It's perfectly acceptable according to federal or whatever governmental laws to do that. But it's outlawed to study chimpanzees, to use them for medical experiments, because they think that's inhumane. The irony of it all. So that's my mini rant here, okay? The main point is God provided. And yes, thank you, Conrad. So sad. But protect the lab rats. Yes, indeed. An assassination attempt was made on the president of a big pharma company. I think it was Novartis, because they used rats to be able to develop pharmaceuticals. They needed these lab rats to test the safety of pharmaceuticals, and animal rights activists were incensed, and they tried to assassinate the president of the pharmaceutical company. And when I would be visiting the NIH to go to school, I was wondering, why do I have to get through all these security scans? And I realized, not only is it just a generally good policy for whatever reason, but I said the NIH does do and fund research on animals. And I said, yeah, some animal rights advocate come in there and try to blow up some of the labs. And so I just like, yeah, I'm really glad you guys are putting me through a security screening. It felt like an airport screening. People were lining up just to go inside. And I was thinking, that's how outrageous we are at a medical facility trying to heal human beings, and it could be terrorized. So that began, how this relates to my research is that I began to see biology in a different way. So whatever viewpoint you have, if you're a young or old Earth creationist, but especially the young Earth creationist, it's like, well, what do we do with the fact that we have this, what appears to be a progression of transitionals? And if one is an ID proponent like Michael Behe, we can still say, yeah, we can assume common ancestry, and then we have this kind of progression. And I will say this, there's one progression that is interesting that they don't want to admit, that humans are very special, that there's been a tremendous increase in complexity. Humans are, their brains and their genes, if we take human genes across, if we take a gene that we find in a human and it's also existent in all species like bacteria, even that same gene is more complex. So like you could say we have airplanes from older eras and then we have modern airplanes. They may be the same kind of basic architecture with the wings and rudders and ailerons, et cetera, et cetera. And we could say kind of like in the same way, if we have proteins across species or systems across species that are, you can recognize them as similar, the human implementation is very much more complex, and that's the subject of another talk. But they have way more post-translational modifications. Their gene regulation is far more complex. The gene expression, what they call combinatorial gene regulation, it's far more complex in eukaryotes, especially in humans. And it is like a stairway. So how does this relate to some of my research? In this, and people who know me say, I don't like the use of I'll say the code argument's okay for arguing that DNA is special, but I prefer to use the chemical arguments, like in the book Stairway to Life, because we can show the improbability of as a matter of principle of how the genetic code is assembled from a chemical standpoint in physics. We can actually throw numbers at it. So John Maddox is correct to say that we have, by analogy, the idea of code spontaneously arising is so remote. But the reason I like the chemical arguments is we can put figures to this. We can make the argument more forceful with mathematics and chemistry and physics and probability theory. So I'm not saying the code argument is wrong. I'm saying there's ways to prosecute it by actually going at the chemical level. And so also ID proponents have used information theory. I said, like I mentioned Bill Dembski earlier, and I said, that his steganography argument is fabulous. It's cutting edge ID, and I'll cover steganography. But I felt his conception of specified complexity, it was kind of a dead end. No one uses it. And I've given examples of even human-made designs, and I'd ask proponents of specified complexity to say, okay, give me a figure. Calculate the specified complexity of a house of cards. Calculate the specified complexity of 500 fair coins being 100% heads. And all the calculations either can't be made or they're just unwieldy when simpler math is available. So there was a big move in the ID movement then to tie a lot of ID to information theory. And I said, don't do that. There's one exception, and it is in the area of steganography. So let me talk about that. Let me see if I can find, this is when I studied electrical engineering, and Ben Rex, if you're listening, Ben Rex is our resident electrical engineer, and this is my book from my electrical engineering studies. As some of you know, I was an engineer in the aerospace and defense industry, but I actually very rarely used electrical engineering or any physical engineering. Most of it was just software development. So let's see, mutual information, page 684. And I'm working on a project that uses this math here on mutual information. And I'll show you a little bit of some of this on a project I'm working on. And I know the math looks just kind of just nasty and agonizing, and it is. But where did this body of math arise? It was so that, I don't know if you knew, like some of you remember, we had modems that were operating at like 300 baud, whatever that bit rate measure is, and the theoretical limit was at 30,000. This was over copper wire, and I think they've since been able to actually improve it because they found some physical characteristics of the way copper behaves that we could actually improve the rate. So we went from 300 to 30,000. So that's an increase of 100 times, but there is a theoretical limit. So where all this math came about, this idea of mutual information, was to help, and it connects, I suppose, with Shannon's theory. How many bits can we push through a wire per second, or or a wireless communication channel? And so all this agonizing math and these modulation schemes were evaluated and developed. Now, if there is a code in biology that is trying to send us information about how it's structured, if there's a hidden code that's telling us, like a user manual, then we can use this high-powered math that I was just showing you. And so let me see if I could find this. Kirk Thurston came out. Yeah, here it is. I'm going to find it. So one of my colleagues, and I mentioned this, and this is public knowledge. He's a known ID proponent, and so is Joe DeWeese, and so am I. And we had that recent peer-reviewed press release, quote unquote, recently, and that was big news to celebrate. But it actually originated in this paper by Durston, and so let me highlight this. This was his dissertation, and it got into peer-reviewed in a bioinformatic journal, and I'm just going to share it here. And he has this math here. It's called mutual information. And we actually were going through this, and we've been going through this for the last 3 weeks, trying to improve the notation. And we've had long discussions over this. We've had a lot of exchanges via email reviewing this and saying, let's try to explain this a little more clearly. And there have been discussions on notation. And when I was just showing all that math in my information theory book, this is the calculation for mutual information. And what we found, there's even nastier math, but all this to say, we are trying to look for coded messages in biology. Oh yes, Mats, here it is. Oh goodness, Mats is here. Talk about a faithful fan. He's followed me for 18 years on various blogs, and I think I'm going to do a show on Mike Jean and his contribution, just for old memory's sake. So I was on the ARN forums in 2003, and it's been 18 years now that I've been in the intelligent design debate. So yes, Kirk is a fabulous guy. So I was just showing what all that math on information theory is. We can detect what looks like transmission. Really, the term is correlations. And there are these kind of like non-random features that help us, that have like the secret message. So let me show it here. Proteins have, see, the transthyretin. Okay, there's a ubiquitin protein. So we're going through all this math, and it's just grueling computationally. And so, we usually need a team of guys. You need a mathematician, a computational specialist, a biologist, a protein biologist, a biochemist. And our team has had that because you need all of them. This has to be a team effort. No one, it's too complicated for one guy to try to do this by solo. So let me show you. So here we have this picture of ubiquitin here, and this is just a molecular rendering. Now, this is actually a very nice diagram here. This is a stick diagram of an individual molecule. So you could see, I think that's an aromatic ring. Yeah, histidine. I didn't know that's aromatic ring. I don't know. James Carter would know what this is. But this is kind of a stick diagram of an individual amino acid here. And the cloud you see there is like the electron cloud right there. And you have another amino acid, valine. And you can see the numbers there that identifies the specific amino acid in that protein string. And so when we have these amino acid sequences, we want to find out, like in 3 dimensions, are they physically close? So you could see that the leucine, let me show it here. So you could see like the leucine 43 here is physically close to leucine 60. And see if I have another one. There are probably going to be more striking examples of this. But what we can do, when I was talking about kind of the mysterious message in biology, if we treat biology like a communication system that is to be decoded, so what we were able to do, and we're not the only lab that's done this. There are actually labs that are doing even more advanced work. They're not ID friend. Well, they're not organized to be ID friendly. Their mission is to discover protein structure. But I do know that in some of these labs, there are ID friendly guys. So you'll never see in any of this literature that any mention of intelligent design. But what I'm trying to point out is, let me see if I can, if you'll indulge me, see if I can just pull up multiple sequence alignment. And I'll show one. See if I could find an example. Okay. I think I have a good one here. And since we're getting late, I don't think we're going to go into a deep talk about nihilism and the work of Friedrich Jacobi. I might only mention it in passing and save it for another day. But let me show here a sequence alignment. So this is what they call a sequence alignment. Evolutionary biologists use this a lot. So each row represents this particular protein in various species. So you might have like a human, a chimpanzee, or a rat, a yeast, whatever, and each row will be a different organism. What we have found is when we run this through this algorithm that detects non-random correlations, it's like we are detecting a structured signal. Yeah, that's the way to put it. Just like in communication theory, when you can detect in a system that there's information being transmitted, that the behavior at the input and output ends is non-random, then you know there's information being transmitted, that there's a code being implemented. And so we would take sequence alignments like this, pump it through our machines, our algorithms, and then we're able to plot relationships like this. And what I have said, and what Dembski has pointed out, there's no way you should be able to do that if that's random. And I'm just like, that's right. That's right. I mean, this has to be designed. This has to be encrypted so that you could do this stuff across species. And that's an argument for common design. And that also explains why living organisms have a nested hierarchical structure. It is a consequence of this hidden design that is helping us make scientific discovery. It's optimized for this. There are labs across the country doing stuff like this. They use a different algorithm called direct coupling analysis. You can look it up on Wikipedia. It's just as miserably difficult as our algorithm. Our algorithm can actually study non-structured proteins. They're proteins that don't have an inherent physical shape. It's very flexible. It's kind of amorphous. They're called intrinsically disordered proteins, but we can compute interactional relationships. And Bill Dembski said that would be a triumph for intelligent design. So whether the secular world will accept this or not, it doesn't matter. The biological world, particularly the structural biologists, teams of them are pursuing this. So they'll say this happened because of evolution, and I think a smart mathematician needs to weigh in on this and say no, that's an improbable thing that could evolve. This would have to be designed to be able to give you this sort of structural and functional data. So that is the work I'm working on. And like I said, in the peer-reviewed article, it won't mention ID at all. It'll just say you run this algorithm on these sequences, and you can predict functional relationships among the amino acids. And if that mathematician's able to come along and show what I intuitively predict and what Dembski's intuitively predict, this will show another level of design that the evolutionary biologist said, it's mostly a random walk with some natural selection. And this will show it's like, no, this is not a random walk. This was designed by God, who had in mind 21st century technology that could actually do stuff like this with our computers. That God has sent us a biotic message, to use Walter Remind's words, to let us know he's there and that he's the designer of all things, especially biology. And there's a mind behind this that's beyond all our comprehension, because this would take a superior mind to be able to embed code like this on proteins that are unique to each species, and each species that's optimized for the benefit of the organism. And that's also another topic. A National Academy of Science guy actually said, yeah, the proteins look intelligently designed for this, and that's another topic altogether. I'm glad I mentioned it because I need to do a show on that. And then also it's optimized for scientific discovery. We can do cool things like this as if someone had realized we could have all this electrical engineering stuff and communication theory and information theory, and we could detect relationships like this and make maybe kind of almost outrageous connections of, we can make outrageous inferences that we could look at this and then say that predicts the protein shaped like that. And I may talk about that more. I also talked briefly about some of my work on today on structural biology, talking about one way to conceive of most mutations being deleterious is just think about geometry. You change the sequence, you change the shape and size. It's just like trying to change parts in a car by filing them down or altering them physically. It won't work. So many things are optimized in biology. And I don't have time to cover aviation, quantitative finance, and educational methods. That's peripheral anyway. I'll close maybe by saying that, I was going to cover nihilism and work of Jacobi and Nietzsche. And so that'll be the subject of another show. But what they had realized, whether intentionally or not, is that as we start to devalue humans, and there are a variety of ways that it can be done by like saying, there's no meaning in the universe. There's, if you don't have meaning and purpose and we're just random accidents, it affects our moral foundation. If there's no meaning in the universe, then even our philosophy and science become meaningless. And so does life and everything. And that is the consequence of if you start with an atheistic worldview. And Nietzsche saw this, that Christianity had such a, at the heart of it was the idea of truth. And then related to that is objective reality, that there's certain absolute, you can say, in a relative society, it's like, well, it just depends, it's up to your interpretation. There's, you can throw your own meaning. It's, to paraphrase Richard Dawkins, you make up your own meaning. And the Christian viewpoint is there's a right and wrong way to interpret things, and because there's objective reality, not just in terms of the physics and chemistry, but also in terms of morals and the existence of God, the idea of right and wrong and purpose. And atheism, if you reject God, the philosophers worked this out. I said the consequences, then you end up, you can't build a coherent philosophy where there's anything of meaning. And I mean, it's just, I think they were kind of long winded, but they arrived at that. And, it's like what I was saying. There's no answers in atheism. It's not what I said. Actually, an atheist said that. There are no answers in atheism. And that's fundamentally, even though we don't have as much physical evidence as we might like to have of the Christian faith. And what I mean by that is, I think it's perfectly noble if we want God's presence to be with us and that he's as real as the air we breathe to our senses. I think that's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing to long for that, because one day we will see him. But in the meantime, he just sometimes will throw us crumbs just to test us, to see if we're going to crawl to seek after him. And I've said the reason God, one of the reasons, not the only reason, that God is hidden, is it's to separate those who really want to pursue him versus those that don't. And that's just the way he's designed reality. And so I just wanted to say that sometimes when I've wavered in my faith, I said, well, what are the alternatives? I'm certainly not going to follow atheism, because I've gone to them. I said, okay, if I'm on my deathbed, what hope can you give me? And they never had answers. So I'll end with that. Christ has the answers. And I want to just say thank you. And Mr. Jetty, it's just great seeing you. I'm going to, I've appreciated your private emails to me, sending me links. And I'm slow to getting around to discussing them here. And I know there's some questions and comments on the channel that I've not been able to get to, but we're already approaching 4 hours for this stream, and my voice is already starting to break. So I'd like to thank all of you who have who've joined this talk. It's been an honor to be with my brothers and sisters in Christ, and you all have been supportive of me during this hard time. And I don't feel quite so lonely, because I have my brothers and sisters in the Lord. So here in the Eastern time zone of the USA, it's already Sunday morning, and it is the Lord's Day. And you all have a blessed Lord's Day. Take care, and God bless you. And